These occurrences are seldom discussed outside their native countries, tales shared only in hushed tones found in military archives, recalled by startled aviators, and imprinted in the memories of ordinary citizens who have encountered the extraordinary. Find a comfortable spot, close your eyes, and immerse yourself in these narratives of UFO sightings and alien confrontations transpiring throughout Europe. The night stretches endlessly, the secrets abound, and the truth lies beyond the celestial boundaries.
Did you hear that?
One of the most significant
It's right
cases
there.
within this tapestry of mystery is the Belgian Triangle Wave, spanning from 1989 to 1990 in Belgium. As the clock struck 5 in the evening, the phone lines at the Upapin police station began to illuminate with calls. One after another, motorists halted along the E40 motorway, farmers gazed in astonishment from their frost-kissed fields, and an elderly woman from Henri Chapelle remained glued to her window, conveying her fears over the phone. It hovered just beneath the treetops, a black triangle, eerily silent. Initially, the dispatcher suspected a prank, yet soon another call came through, followed by another. By 5:15, a patrol vehicle was en route, with officers Jarms, Heinrich Nicole, and Hubert von Montenay heading toward the village of Upon, close to the German border. What they were about to witness over the course of the next 90 minutes would not only challenge their preconceived notions, but also capture the attention of the world. That fateful night on November 29, 1989, ushered in what became infamously known as the Belgian UFO wave, a 5-month period when thousands of ordinary citizens, law enforcement members, air traffic controllers, and military personnel alike would report observing silent, low-flying black triangular craft that seemingly violated the rules of physics. To this day, this event stands as the most extensively documented mass UFO sighting in European history. Amazingly, the origins of the craft remain a complete enigma. It began quietly. In the days leading up to the initial significant wave, residents of Liège-Pro began to recount sightings of peculiar lights in the night sky, most of which were dismissed as misidentified stars or common aircraft. However, the events of November 29th altered everything. That evening, Gendarme Nicole and his partner heeded witness reports leading them to the Lake Gilp vicinity. There, they beheld it, a substantial black triangular entity adorned with bright lights positioned at each vertex, complemented by a red pulsating glow at its center. It hovered in silence just above the treetops before it glided slowly and purposefully across the night sky. There was no engine noise, no downwash, just an imposing geometric silhouette slicing through the starry expanse. At one point, the object executed a sharp turn and vanished from their view without emitting a single sound. The officers stood transfixed, uncertain whether to call for reinforcement or report their astonishing observation. In due time, they would gather official testimonies, which would later be corroborated with numerous civilian accounts from that very night, all depicting the same mesmerizing sight. A massive dark triangle, comparable in size to a football field, flying impossibly low and slow without issuing a sound. The incident quickly captured the attention of national media. Unlike prior UFO flaps that could easily be cast aside due to scant evidence or untrained witnesses, the Belgian accounts involved highly trained individuals, including military personnel, pilots, radar technicians, and police officers. Even skeptics found it hard to turn a blind eye. In the weeks that followed, the frequency of reports surged. Between November 1989 and April 1990, over 2,000 formal UFO sightings were documented across Belgium. Most accounts shared a striking resemblance: black triangular crafts featuring 3 white lights at each corner and 1 red glow in the center, accompanied by a silent flight at a low altitude and slow movement, often succeeded by rapid acceleration. The eyewitness reports concentrated particularly around Wogna, the French-speaking region, especially near Lestieux, Namur, and Wavre. Testimonials poured in from both small villages and larger metropolitan areas. Diverging from the chaotic frenzy of earlier UFO waves, this one unfolded in an organized, methodical manner of vast proportions. the Belgian Air Force recognized the gravity of the situation. In March 1990, amidst escalating public interest, the military began to monitor these objects via radar. A pivotal moment arrived on the night transitioning from March 30th to 31st, when two F-16 fighter jets were dispatched from Bavsa Air Base to intercept a triangular craft detected by Glan's radar station. The jets acquired a lock with their onboard radar, only for the object to perform an extraordinary maneuver no known aircraft could replicate. It plunged from an altitude of 10,000 feet to 1,000 feet in under 5 seconds, an impossible action for any conventional airplane or helicopter, especially without producing a sonic boom. Radar operators witnessed the object executing zigzag movements before disappearing from the scope, only to re-emerge elsewhere in the night sky moments later. The pilots lost visual contact. As the object slipped from sight, the radar logs endured. Colonel Wilfried de Rauwer, who was then the chief of operations for the Belgian Air Force, took to the public stage. In a televised briefing, he affirmed that unidentified crafts had been monitored by both ground-based and airborne radar systems. He clarified that these objects were not part of any NATO or Belgian military operations, and that their origins remained uncharted. In a historic precedent, the Belgian Air Force voluntarily released radar data to civilian UFO research organizations. SOBEPS, the SOA Belge d'études de spatio, was granted complete access to the case files. For the first time in contemporary history, a national military joined forces transparently with civilian UFO researchers. Among the notable evidence was a photograph taken by a man known as Patrick M. in April 1990, showcasing a black triangle hovering above a field in Patira. The image portrayed a distinct triangular profile featuring bright corner lights and a central red luminance, widely circulated in media outlets as a strong piece of evidence for the sightings. Yet, it was eventually declared a hoax in 2011 by an individual claiming to be the original photographer. Still, even without that photograph, the essence of the case remained robust. Numerous radar confirmations, corroborated eyewitness accounts from trained professionals, and flight patterns exhibiting capabilities far beyond those of recognized aircraft sustained its legitimacy. There were no audible booms, no trail of jets, and no debris scattered on the ground. Just the quiet presence of something unusual before it vanished into the night. Theories proliferated in abundance. Some theorists speculated these triangular crafts were clandestine NATO or United States stealth aircraft undergoing nocturnal evaluations over Belgian territory. Yet, at no point has any stealth platform been documented to hover silently, maneuver at nearly zero velocity, and then suddenly accelerate to astonishing speeds without generating noise. The airspace over Belgium is scrupulously monitored, and NATO officials consistently denied any unauthorized activities. Others proposed an extraterrestrial origin. However, this wave of sightings did not resonate with the chaotic, unpredictable behavior typically linked to earlier reports of flying saucers. On the contrary, the triangle crafts exhibited a deliberate approach. They were often sighted above power facilities, military sites, and isolated communities, appearing intentioned in their visibility, yet never exuding menace. As anticipated, skeptics sought to undermine the sightings, labeling them as mere misidentifications of stars, weather balloons, or mass hysteria. However, such arguments crumbled under analytical examination. Weather balloons do not manifest as solid black triangles. Stars do not traverse the sky horizontally. Moreover, mass hysteria cannot account for radar locks or the documented speeds logged by trained military personnel, which reached thousands of kilometers per hour. Although the Belgian government refrained from issuing an official explanation, it did not outright deny the occurrences, displaying commendable discretion. Colonel de Rauwer, who later emerged as a prominent figure in global UFO studies, affirmed in various interviews that the Belgian UFO wave was indeed tangible. The military acknowledged the presence of unidentified entities in the airspace above, showcasing flight traits that exceeded human capabilities, and the mystery surrounding them endures. Today, the incident dubbed the Belgian Triangle Wave is recognized as a landmark case in UFO history. Unlike the disordered chaos of the Roswell incident or the sporadic reports stemming from sites like Rendlesham Forest, the Belgian flap unfolded in a systematic manner over several months, involving thousands of witnesses and transparent military engagement. It serves as a paradigmatic example of how governmental bodies might, and arguably should, approach aerial phenomena. Official files continue to remain accessible, and the questions they raise persist unanswered. In the recollections of those who witnessed such phenomena, GRM officers, airline pilots, radar experts, and ordinary citizens, echoes the memory of something extraordinary. A silent black triangle hovered above their homes, as real as the earth beneath their feet. The Berwyn Mountain incident, dated January 23, 1974, took place in Clyde, North Wales, UK. It commenced with a tremor that reverberated through the walls, shattering the stillness of a snow-blanketed winter night. In the quaint village of Landrio, tucked away amidst the Berwyn Mountains of North Wales, the inhabitants were abruptly awoken just after 8:30 in the evening on January 23, 1974. Some theorized it was an earthquake. Others speculated an explosion had occurred underground. Yet, those who ventured outside to gaze toward the mountains encountered something even more peculiar: an intense radiance, shifting hues, gradually descending behind the crest of Car Berwyn. Among the first to report this phenomenon was local nurse Pat Evans, who had been at home with her two daughters. All three observed the brilliant lights and presumed an airliner had crashed. Driven by a desire to assist possible survivors, Pat seized her medical kit and ventured with her daughters toward the mountainous terrain. They were not alone in their pursuit. Other villagers had already set forth toward the remote slopes. Some recounted seeing a pulsing amber light lingering low on the ridge. Others described flashes of blue or red, appearing and vanishing intermittently. By the time Pat Evans reached the mountain road, she halted her vehicle and gazed ahead in astonishment. There, resting on the hillside in sheer silence, was what she described as a perfect circle of light, pulsing, stationary, and utterly unnatural. Simultaneously, across neighboring villages in Denbighshire, dozens of calls flooded into the police regarding loud tremors, flashing lights, and what many assumed was a plane crash. Local authorities contacted the Royal Air Force and the Ministry of Defense. RAF Valley on Anglesey reported that no military or civilian aircraft were unaccounted for. With no crash alerts in the system, the British Geological Survey later verified that a minor earthquake, measuring 3.5 on the Richter scale, had indeed impacted the region centered in the Berwyn Mountains. However, discrepancies persisted. Witnesses maintained that the ground shook, accompanied by an aerial display that was not a result of the tremor. The lights in the sky were visible before and after the tremor, extending well beyond the duration expected from a typical earthquake or meteor strike. Particularly puzzling was the swiftness of the official response. According to numerous testimonies, military vehicles had converged on the area within mere hours and cordoned off crucial routes. Helicopters were seen traversing the mountain range the following morning. By dawn, official explanations began to surface. The government asserted that a minor earthquake combined with a bolide, a particularly bright meteor, was to blame. They claimed the light had simply been the bolide streaking across the sky, disintegrating beyond the mountains. Yet, for many witnesses, this narrative failed to resonate. A meteor that scintillated for over 10 minutes, seeming to descend and then remain stationary on a ridge, illuminating the hillside without a sound, defied common understanding. Pat Evans, when later speaking to the media, firmly reiterated her account. It was not a meteor, she asserted. She knew precisely what she had observed. It appeared structured, neither exploding nor dissipating as meteors are known to do. It lingered there, either hovering or resting on the ground. Rumors began to permeate the community. Some suggested that the military had retrieved something extraordinary from the depths of the mountain. There were whispers that crept through the local pubs regarding the mysterious presence of covered trucks and an air of secrecy that hung heavily in the air. Journalists flocked to the small community, eager to capture any whisper of credible sightings. Some residents recounted visits from strange men clad in suits, asking probing questions about the incident. Others felt the pressure of discouragement, urging them to remain tight-lipped about the extraordinary occurrence. Among the witnesses, Garand Edwards, a farmer residing on the northern fringes of the Berwyns, claimed to have witnessed a metallic object being airlifted by helicopter during the early hours of January 24th. Although he later withdrew his claim, fearing public scorn, his narrative resonated alongside countless others shared in hushed tones among the locals. The intrigue only deepened as accounts surfaced of official records either going missing or being sealed away. A review conducted in 1979 by the Ministry of Defense asserted that no formal investigation had commenced in response to the incident, characterizing the military presence as a routine procedure following a reported crash. However, critics pointed out discrepancies within the timeline and contradictions between public declarations and internal documents subsequently released under the United Kingdom's Freedom of Information Act. In the late 1990s, Tony Dodd, a former police officer who transitioned into a UFO investigator, reignited interest in the Berwyn case. He engaged with more than a dozen locals and claimed to have received testimonies from anonymous military personnel, hinting that a phenomenon far more bizarre than a mere meteor had unfolded that night. One particular testimony alleged that an unidentified craft had been retrieved, with reports suggesting the area was swarming with both UK and US military personnel within mere hours of the incident. Furthest from the ordinary were certain claims regarding the recovery of what were described as non-human bodies, casting echoes reminiscent of the famed Roswell incident. Yet, these assertions remain unsupported and largely grounded in hearsay, lacking any photographic or documentary validation. Nonetheless, tangible evidence was not entirely absent. The British Geological Survey provided a seismic reading that corroborated the accounts. Multiple logs from police and emergency calls confirmed that numerous residents reported seeing peculiar lights, some flickering, others steady, coinciding with the seismic event. Meteor specialists later challenged the rationale behind the bolide explanation, noting that no such object was definitively recorded by observatories on that night. The scale of civilian sightings was staggering. It extended beyond just Landrelo. Reports poured in from Langenog, Corwin, and even further afield from Wrexham, where witnesses shared tales of a craft descending in complete silence. Descriptions flowed in of television sets flickering mysteriously, dogs barking in distress, and several farmers observing restlessness among their livestock for days following the event. In the aftermath, the Berwyn Mountains garnered considerable attention from UFO researchers, leading to various theories ranging from a downed alien vessel to clandestine military experiments being conducted in the area. This surge in interest drew visitors, some desperate to uncover remnants of the incident, while others approached with mere curiosity. Local authorities, fatigued by the mounting attention, stood firm in their declarations. Nothing had crashed, nothing had been recovered, attributing the combination of an earthquake and a meteor to the perceived phenomena. Yet many villagers remained unconvinced. In subsequent years, Pat Evans persisted in recounting her account, asserting she had been approached by officials days after the events who subtly dissuaded her from conducting interviews, a sentiment echoed by others. Whatever transpired on January 23, 1974, it left behind more than lingering queries. It established a legacy of silence. Autonomous researchers continued to pursue information requests, digging through police archives and re-examining earlier interviews. In 2002, journalist Nick Redern released a detailed examination of the event, addressing the still enigmatic military presence and the conflicting assertions made by officials. He concluded that while no concrete evidence conclusively indicated an extraterrestrial occurrence, the official narrative told by authorities was equally unsubstantiated. To this day, the Berwyn Mountain incident remains one of Britain's most tantalizing and contentious UFO cases. It bears striking resemblances to other encounters: an abrupt seismic event, the sighting of luminous objects, swift military involvement, and an equally swift endeavor toward informational termination. Yet, in its particulars, the sheer volume of civilian witnesses, the remote rural environment, the geological corroboration, it finds its own unique standing. The British government did release some files related to the case in the early 2000s, yet many believe that the most sensitive documentation remains hidden from public scrutiny. Much like Roswell, Rendlesham, and Kecksburg, the gaps within the narrative seem just as telling as the known facts. If a craft did in fact crash within the Berwyn Mountains, any remnants thereof have long since vanished. If the lights reported were merely meteors, they were unlike any ordinary meteors observed before. And if the earthquake was to blame, it came swathed in a mesmerizing spectacle of light and enigma. Half a century later, the residents of Landrio still hold on to vivid memories of the night when the earth quaked and the sky blazed, and many continue to gaze toward the mountains, pondering what truly fell from the heavens. The Calvine photograph, dated August 4, 1990. Just outside Calvine, located within the picturesque Scottish Highlands, an aura of tranquility prevails. The undulating hills retreat beneath overcast skies, allowing for a landscape that rarely betrays disturbance. This stillness rendered the events of August 4, 1990, all the more remarkable. What unfolded in this secluded locale has remained shrouded in mystery ever since. Two men, whose identities remain undisclosed in public records, were trekking just north of Calvine, positioned near the A9 road. One of them sports a camera, capturing moments as they approach a distant lodge, when their attention is suddenly captivated by an unusual sight in the sky. A significant diamond-shaped object, polished metallic in appearance, hovered silently just above the treetops. Its surface caught the dying light of the day, reflecting it with a sheen more akin to dull aluminum, exuding an eerie luminosity. It emitted not a single sound, nor did it project any exhaust. It was not alone in this enigma. In close proximity, two swiftly moving military jets hovered nearby, identified post factum by their shape and configuration as RAF Harriers. The jets maneuvered around the object, their movements measured and purposeful, maintaining close proximity without veering far off course. The enigmatic diamond did not attempt to elude them. It offered no signs of acceleration. Instead, it lingered steadily, suspended in the air as if it was entirely liberated from the constraints of weight and propulsion, with no apparent regard for the forces of gravity that govern other aerial entities. The witnesses, instinctively sensing the anomaly's significance, crouched low behind a thicket and captured a series of 6 photographs. Upon developing the film, one particular frame emerged with extraordinary clarity. It depicted both the diamond-shaped object and one adjacent RAF jet against the backdrop of the luminous sky, a moment frozen in time that would eventually be referred to as the Calvine photograph. The men, bewildered by their experience, entrusted the negatives to the Daily Record, a tabloid known for its readiness to explore everything from political scandals to local myths. A journalist there promptly reached out to the Ministry of Defense for a statement, a request that went unanswered. Instead, the photograph, along with the negatives and the accompanying report, was confiscated. The story, subsequently, never reached the public's eye. The witnesses themselves faded into obscurity, their identities remaining unknown as the photograph vanished from public discourse for over 3 decades. At that juncture, the Ministry of Defense operated a discrete unit that monitored reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, maintaining the use of the term UFO in official documentation. Subsequent testimony from Nick Pope, a former employee of the MOD who worked in Secretary Air Staff 2A, indicated that the Calvine incident was treated with notable seriousness behind closed doors. The photograph was internally characterized as one of the clearest daylight images of an unidentified flying object ever acquired by the ministry. It was rumored that a large print of the photograph was affixed to a wall inside Whitehall, accessible to intelligence analysts, air staff, and senior officials alike. Some speculated on the craft's origins, with hypotheses ranging from a state-of-the-art U.S. reconnaissance platform to more ambiguous possibilities. Yet, an official explanation was never forthcoming. The general public might have remained entirely oblivious to the Calvine photograph had it not been for two pivotal developments. First, in 2009, the British government began a phased release of previously classified UFO files, spurred by mounting pressure and the utilization of the Freedom of Information Act. Among the myriad documents shared was a reference to a UFO photograph taken near Calvine in 1990, logged and investigated, yet ultimately left without commentary. The second significant event arose in 2022 when former RAF press officer Craig Lindsay, now retired, disclosed his possession of a copy of the photograph, one he had preserved for decades after overseeing the case in 1990. It was a first-generation print, pristine and vivid, illustrating precisely what the original witnesses had claimed to observe: a diamond-shaped object hovering against the sky with a Harrier jet near the horizon. The image was subsequently made public by Dr. David Clarke, a journalist and historian from the UK who had diligently researched the case over the years. He dubbed the image the most extraordinary UFO photograph ever submitted to the MOD, and its release reignited significant public interest. Nonetheless, the negatives remained elusive, and the MOD offered no further commentary. In 2001, the MOD declared that it held no position on the origin or authenticity of the Calvine image and that the file had been closed. However, internal documents exposed through FOIA requests revealed a more reserved stance. A memo from 1993 highlighted concerns that releasing the photograph without sufficient explanation could provoke unnecessary public anxiety. It also acknowledged that while the object remained unidentified, there was no evidence suggesting an intent of hostility or threat. Consequently, the photograph was sealed for a 30-year term, extended to 50. Initially scheduled for release in 2021, the National Archives withheld the negatives until at least 2017, citing privacy and defense considerations, with no rationale provided for the postponement. Among ufologists and defense analysts, the Calvine incident emerged as a focal point, not merely due to its visual evidence, but also because of the circumstances surrounding its disappearance. Some postulated that the object might have been affiliated with a U.S. black project, such as the rumored Aurora high-speed reconnaissance aircraft, while others contended that any such craft would unlikely hover noiselessly and would certainly not undergo public testing over Scotland without the RAF's coordination. Another theory connected the Calvine case to a series of other sightings of triangular and diamond-shaped objects throughout the UK during the waning years of the Cold War, an era rife with geopolitical tension, experimental aircraft trials, and a burgeoning civilian fascination with classified technologies. What distinguished Calvine, however, was not solely its photographic evidence. Its narrative intertwined military involvement, official confiscation, trails of FOIA applications, and the remarkable absence of any logical explanation even after decades had elapsed. The identities of the two hikers involved remained undisclosed. According to Lindsay, the press officer who originally received the negatives, they were respectable, earnest individuals who genuinely appeared shaken by their experience. There were no indications of a hoax or concocted tale. They never sought recognition or financial reward. In fact, their demeanor suggested a sincere desire for understanding rather than fame. After submitting the photographs, they seemingly evaporated from the storyline altogether. No follow-up interviews emerged. There was no public inquiry regarding their identities. The Calvine case often draws parallels with the Petit Rachan photograph from Belgium during the Belgian wave of 1989 to 1990. Although the latter garnered notoriety, it was ultimately revealed to be a hoax. In contrast, Calvine has never faced debunking, and unlike Petit Rachan, its materials were confiscated by military intelligence merely hours after being submitted. This distinction continues to resonate with researchers. As of 2025, the original negatives remain securely locked away. Numerous FOIA requests by British journalists, citizen investigators, and scholars have been met with refusals or delays. While the print shared by Craig Lindsay provides strong visual documentation, experts emphasize that without the negatives, the image cannot undergo complete authentication via forensic analysis. Yet, for many observers, the photograph reveals its own narrative. What it encapsulates is not a spectacle of grandeur. There is no radiant beam, no enigmatic creature, no bustling crowd, just a solitary metallic object, quietly hovering above the Scottish hills, flanked by military jets in broad daylight, witnessed by civilians and recorded by the press before slipping into obscurity. It did not arrive with the remnants of a crash site or a radar trace, but it also did not dissolve into legend like countless others. The Calvine photograph is cemented in documentation. It garnered serious consideration and was subsequently obscured. It represents not merely a rare visual oddity, but also a profound commentary on how governments meticulously manage unexplained occurrences. The British Ministry of Defense never classified the object as a threat, yet it conspicuously refrained from informing the public about its own beliefs regarding the incident. It simply gathered evidence and tucked it neatly away. With official answers lacking, the narrative endures. Fragments linger, memories, trails of paperwork, one surviving image, and the sky over Calvine, like much of the serene Scottish countryside, remains tranquil. But for those who remember that August afternoon in 1990, one question remains suspended in the air over the hills. Why was access to it so subtly obstructed? The Clan Lake Incident. June 18, 1960. Clan Lake, Northwest Territories, Canada. The remote wilderness of Canada evokes a particular kind of silence, one that permeates the trees, seeps into the lake water, and settles in the minds of anyone who lingers too long without the comfort of company. That tranquil stillness was abruptly disrupted on a placid afternoon in June 1960 by an occurrence that defies explanation. Not by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, nor by Ottawa, and not by the two prospectors who were witnesses to it. Situated about 30 kilometers north of Yellowknife, Clan Lake is a remote expanse of deep blue, cradled within the boreal forest and ancient rock formations. During the summer of 1960, it attracted numerous mineral exploration camps, including one manned by two independent prospectors, Gerald Hawthorne and Robert Sprackhicklin. On June 18th, as the sun dipped toward evening, the two men were concluding their day's pursuits. According to subsequent statements delivered to the RCMP, the clock read approximately 3:15 p.m. when an unexpected noise jolted them from their routine. Spracklin characterized it as a thud, akin to a large log striking the lake's surface. Turning their attention toward the water, they initially discerned only gentle ripples. Then, about 200 yards from the shore, a circular object emerged, not from below, but rather from above. It seemed to descend vertically into the lake, creating a minimal disturbance despite its apparent size. They estimated the object's diameter to be around 5 feet, metallic, with a smooth, dull silver sheen. Free of any markings, wings, or visible means of propulsion, Hawthorne later recounted to investigators that it descended as if carried by something unseen, possessing no weight of its own. Once it breached the water's surface, the lake quickly returned to calm. Within a minute, disturbances had ceased entirely. Both men were sober and seasoned outdoorsmen. They had faced bears, inclement weather, and equipment failures, yet nothing they had encountered bore resemblance to the peculiar object before them. That evening, the incident found its place in their camp log. The following morning, they boarded a float plane back to Yellowknife, where they submitted a report to the local RCMP detachment. Constable Brian Wilkie took it upon himself to interview the men separately. He found their narratives to align and observed that neither seemed distressed or given to fanciful tales. In his report, which later emerged through an access to information request in the 1990s, Wilkie documented, both men describe sighting an unknown aerial object descending into Clan Lake. No conventional aircraft matching the description was reported in the area. The RCMP subsequently forwarded the case to the Department of National Defense, DND, in Ottawa. What transpired next was never formally revealed to the public. 3 days following the report's filing, 2 officers from the Canadian Forces Base at Cold Lake arrived in Yellowknife. According to a flight log from the Yellowknife Airport dated June 21st, a military hydrographic team sought charter transport to Clan Lake. Although the requester's name was not disclosed, the flight itself was duly recorded. Hawthorne and Sprackicklin, meanwhile, returned to their camp to resume their work, remaining unaware of any official inquiry. However, solitude was short-lived. On June 22nd, a float plane circled Clan Lake before making a landing on the opposite shoreline. A group of 4 men disembarked, clad in plain clothing yet carrying crates adorned with stenciled numbers. One of the men approached the prospectors' camp and posed a series of subdued questions regarding the duration of their stay, whether they had noticed any unusual debris, and if diving equipment was part of their campsite essentials. Spracklin recalled that one of the men mentioned subsurface scans, a term unfamiliar to him at the time. Their visit lasted no more than 2 hours, and the purpose of their inquiry remained undisclosed. By June 24th, the group departed. The prospectors lingered for an additional 2 weeks, ultimately abandoning their claim due to equipment malfunctions. Years later, in 1981, the incident resurfaced when Canadian UFO researcher Chris Orkowski accessed partial RCMP and DND files pertaining to the event, albeit extensively redacted. One reference categorized the object as an aerial anomaly with subaqueous termination. Another document, dated July 7, 1960, featured a field assessment authored by a DND officer stating, "No trace of aircraft wreckage found." No civilian or military flight plans matched the description. No further action required. Without debris or radar data to guide them, the case languished in obscurity. Yet, what emerged was the degree of subtle coordination. Although military presence was not officially acknowledged, records indicated flights were arranged, lake scans enacted, and inquiries diligently made. Orkowski later assessed that what we are witnessing is an exemplary instance of early Cold War protocol, an incident thoroughly investigated yet subsequently concealed. To the public, nothing of significance transpired at Clan Lake. The local presses remained silent on the story, while the Royal Canadian Mounted Police relegated the report to their archives. The Department of National Defense catalogued the event as a non-hostile unknown. Nevertheless, among scholars and enthusiasts, Clan Lake stands as one of the most credible submerged object encounters documented in Canada. Its understated nature contributes significantly to its allure. The witnesses had no motives to fabricate their accounts, seeking neither media fame nor harboring dread. They simply found themselves engulfed in bewilderment. Spracklin passed away in 1989. Hawthorne, who was interviewed shortly before his own passing in 1995, consistently affirmed the reality of what he and Spracklin had encountered. "We saw it," he insisted, emphasizing that while he could not define what it was, the experience was undeniably real. Decades later, an intriguing revelation surfaced from a retired employee of the Department of Transport who claimed to have perused internal memos related to the case. In a letter dispatched in 2002 to the Canadian UFO Survey, he articulated concerns that the object might have been a platform for foreign surveillance, though the descending trajectory, he noted, did not align with the dynamics of balloons or drones. An internal note referenced a controlled drop, a technology not recognized as existing in 1960. Unlike episodes characterized by flashing lights or abduction narratives, the Clan Lake event occupies a subtler category: unprovoked, unheralded, and unresolved. This incident weaves into a broader pattern of Canadian sightings, often meticulously documented, occasionally investigated, but generally consigned to oblivion. No monument stands at Clan Lake. There are no local lore or legends, only a faint ripple in the pages of history and the steadfast memory of 2 men who clung to their account. In 2016, a private expedition composed of civilian researchers endeavored to revisit the site utilizing side-scan sonar. Although adverse weather restricted the breadth of their search, no anomalous debris was retrieved. They did report peculiar sonar reflections detected in a specific section of the lake bed, yet lacked the means to dive or sample the area. To this day, the official stance remains unchanged: no confirmed object, no further investigation. Yet, within the realm of researchers, the Clan Lake episode carries a subtle gravity. It serves as a poignant reminder that not every encounter is adorned with flashing lights or pursued by military craft. Some events descend silently, depart without a trace, and slip into obscured locations that go unnoticed. When two men intimately familiar with the land, the lake, and their own senses assert that something otherworldly graced their presence that day, it becomes challenging to simply dismiss their accounts. Not every enigma makes a grand entrance. Some merely drift from the heavens to vanish into the frigid embrace of a northern lake, asserting with silence, "You were not meant to uncover my presence." This narrative shifts to consider the Cusk close encounter that occurred on August 29, 1967, in Canal, France. The sun lazily ascended over the gently rolling foliage of Canal, illuminating the fields in a warm, golden hue characteristic of late summer mornings. It was precisely the sort of tranquil day where little excitement was anticipated. Sheep meandered without haste. The wind stirred gently among the blades of grass. On this day, two young siblings, François and Anne-Marie Dale, engaged in their customary task of tending to their cattle. François, aged 13, perched upon a rock with his little sister Anne-Marie, who was 9, seated beside him. The siblings were well acquainted with their duties. Their objective was straightforward: to keep the cows within the confines of the pasture and ensure none strayed into the encroaching woods or toward the village road. The day unfolded as predictably unremarkable until an imperceptible shift in the atmosphere prompted them to turn their heads. François squinted toward a small hill that lay just beyond their vantage point. There, near the edge of a stone wall, 4 small black figures came into view. Humanoid in shape, but shorter than any adult the children were aware of, the beings stood no taller than just over a meter. Clad in tight, dark suits that faintly glimmered in the morning light, they set François' mind to wander. Initially, he conjectured they might be local children engaged in some peculiar game. But then the extraordinary happened, an event that transcended any benign play. The figures began to levitate, and in locked silence, François and Anne-Marie beheld the spectacle as all 4 beings ascended slowly into the sky, effortlessly, as though defying the heart of gravity itself. Hovering above them, a luminous metallic sphere, approximately 3 meters in diameter, remained completely quiet. This sphere radiated a pale blue glow, pulsing gently in a steady rhythm. The beings ascended in flawless harmony until they vanished into the underbelly of the craft, which then inexplicably disappeared. No flash of light, no roaring sound, no gust of wind, just gone. The children screamed in a mix of fear and amazement. François, determined yet terrified to grasp the reality of what he had witnessed, dashed to the precise location where the figures had stood. Anne-Marie followed closely, tears brimming in her eyes. They scoured the surroundings, seeking comprehension. There were no footprints discernible, but a patch of scorched grass marked the very spot where the object had hovered. Nearby, the cattle had retreated, clustering together visibly disturbed, some bellowing in distress. The behavior of the animals alone convinced François that their experience had not been a figment of their imaginations. The siblings rushed home, a distance of roughly a kilometer, breathlessly recounting the incident to their father, who recognized the sincerity reflected in their shaken demeanor. Within the hour, the local gendarmerie was duly notified. Officer Jean Bouer of the Slur station was the first to arrive at the scene, taking the matter with earnest gravity. He documented the scorched grass, the unsettled cattle, and the coherence with which the children relayed their tale without deviation. A formal report was duly filed that day, prompting the French gendarme to quickly escalate the case to the local medical services and scientific advisors. Francois and Anne-Marie underwent separate interviews and were subjected to psychological assessments. Medical professionals confirmed that both were in excellent health, showing no signs of delusion or trauma unrelated to their narrated experiences. Their accounts remained consistent even under repeated scrutiny weeks later. The French government, already informed of a rising number of unusual aerial sightings across Europe in the 1960s, discreetly dispatched a team from the GP, the official UFO research group operating under the CNES, the National Center for Space Studies. The team engaged in collecting soil and grass samples, performing magnetic field analyses, and acquiring radiation measurements. The scorched area exhibited indications of abrupt high-temperature exposure, yet there was no evidence suggesting typical combustion. Electromagnetic readings proved inconclusive, yet exhibited abnormality. While the scientific team adopted a posture of neutrality, Officer Bouer contributed a personal statement attesting to the children's credibility. He remarked that without a doubt, something extraordinary transpired, affirming the children's truthfulness regarding what they witnessed. Local newspapers quickly captured the essence of the unfolding events. While a portion of the articles ridiculed the children's narrative as products of overactive imaginations, others approached it with a degree of cautious intrigue, especially given the official involvement. Radio hosts engaged in lively debates over whether the sighting was a genuine phenomenon, a prank, or perhaps a psychological episode. Nevertheless, a majority of the townspeople acquainted with the Davila family defended the children's integrity, as they were not typically known for fanciful tales and their story never wavered. Then, an unexpected development occurred. Merely days after the primary sighting, a farmer located several kilometers away reported observing a luminous orb descending behind a wooded area adjacent to his fields. He did not observe any entities. However, his sheep scattered in dismay, and his dog refused to approach the area for hours. Investigators incorporated this observation into the case file, duly noting both the proximity and timing of the incidents. Adding to the intrigue, a week later, a group of schoolchildren in a neighboring town claimed to have seen diminutive black figures hovering in the air. The children's teacher dismissed their claims as mere imagination, but when police probed further, the children's drawings aligned strikingly with Francois and Anne-Marie's descriptions. Once again, no adults witnessed the episode. By this point, the GAN team had amassed a comprehensive dossier enriched with photographs, interviews, and environmental data. An internal memo, which later surfaced in a French UFO research publication during the 1980s, asserted, "This case continues to stand as one of the most coherent and unexplained incidents within national records. Witnesses are credible, and there is no evidence pointing to deception or mental instability." Despite this, the government maintained a stance of neutrality, releasing no public conclusion. Consequently, the case drifted from national consciousness. Time passed, and Francois transitioned into a career as a mechanic, while Anne-Marie pursued a vocation as a teacher. Occasionally, journalists and UFO enthusiasts sought them out for interviews, to which they consistently recounted the same tale, unembellished and unchanged. Francois once expressed in an interview during the 1990s that they had no desire for this attention. However, it occurred, and they could not deny it. He emphasized that he had seen them. They were indeed real. Skeptics continued to propose alternative theories. Could it have been pranksters dressed in costumes accompanied by some sort of weather balloon, they wondered? Could the children have experienced a shared hallucination? Yet, none of these propositions accounted for the scorched earth, the altered behavior of the cattle, or the consistent accounts from unconnected schoolchildren days later. Most importantly, there was no apparent motive. The Duwild family never sought fame or monetary gain. One element that fascinated researchers was the nature of the levitation described. The beings did not hover awkwardly or with discernible propulsion. Instead, their movement appeared smooth, regulated, and synchronous, suggesting weightlessness. This characteristic, reiterated by various witnesses in other European encounters from the era, emerged as a subtle thread within Cold War UFO literature. What further distinguished this encounter was its simplicity. There were no abductions, no exchanges of communication, nor dazzling lights streaking across the night sky. Simply an ordinary day with two children engaged in their chores, culminating in an extraordinary moment that irrevocably altered their worldview. Over the ensuing years, the Cusk close encounter has solidified its status as a cornerstone case in French UFO history. It frequently serves as a reference point in comparative studies of youth sightings and is prominently featured in official GPAN literature, regarded as one of the most credible instances attributed to child witnesses. Some scholars propose that children might be more receptive to perceiving anomalous phenomena, having yet to be conditioned to dismiss the bizarre. Yet, the most haunting aspect remains consistent. This event unfolded in rural France during the 1960s, involving farm children who were largely insulated from the urban folklore surrounding America's flying saucer mania. Nevertheless, what they described, small humanoid figures, metallic crafts, and soundless levitation, conform neatly with the accounts of countless others worldwide. Did they fabricate it? Or could this be an indication that the phenomenon adheres to a pattern that transcends cultural boundaries? Regardless of the explanation, the Cusk case remains an enigma. The Essex Field Incident, 1979, Essex, England. It was intended to be a typical summer weekend in Essex. On the evening of August 17, 1979, three teenagers from Colchester, Stephen Marsh, aged 15, his cousin Daniel Marsh, aged 16, and their friend Aaliyah Forum, aged 15, embarked on a weekend hiking adventure. Their destination, a stretch of rural farmland near the village of Toish Hunt Major. The locale was favored by local campers, set amidst abandoned pillboxes and hedges that had remained unchanged since the Second World War. The trio planned to camp overnight in the fields just beyond an old irrigation ditch, a site recommended by Stephen's older brother for its seclusion and exceptional view of the night sky. Aaliyah had brought along a compact camera, while Daniel had a portable radio perched on his shoulder. Ever the prepared scout, Stephen equipped himself with a torch, 2 compasses, and a well-thumbed copy of the Observer's Book of Astronomy. They erected their small tent at around 7:30 in the evening, proceeding to cook sausages over a tiny gas stove. As they settled in for what they assumed would be a quiet night, the atmosphere shifted. Somewhere around 9:40, just as twilight surrendered to the embracing darkness, Aaliyah pointed towards a glow hovering at the edge of the field. She questioned whether they could see it, prompting the trio to shift their gaze toward the shimmering amber light floating about 200 meters away. Initially, it appeared stable, then began to pulse gently, its rhythm almost hypnotic. Daniel speculated that it could be a car headlight, or perhaps a lantern, yet the light moved in an unnatural manner, hovering and gliding laterally, deviating from the swaying of light filtering through trees or reflecting off a vehicle in motion. In that direction lay no road at all, just the vast expanse of the field. Intrigued, they gathered their gear and crept cautiously along the dirt track bordering the crops. The stillness of the night enveloped them, broken only by the sound of insects and the sporadic distant bark of a dog. When they neared within 30 meters of the glow, Stephen raised his torch and cast a brief beam toward the source. What awaited them made the trio freeze with disbelief. There, in the field, stood a humanoid figure approximately 6 feet tall. Clad in a dark metallic-like suit, its head was concealed beneath a smooth, domed helmet that caught the scattered light. In its right hand, the figure brandished a slender rod or wand that emitted a series of sharp pulsing beeps. The glow they had observed emanated from a small device affixed to the figure's chest or shoulder. It moved deliberately among the barley, occasionally crouching to collect samples. They watched as the creature utilized the rod to inspect the plants before selecting certain stalks and depositing them into a container slung across its shoulder. For several minutes, the teenagers remained concealed behind a low hedge, utterly captivated by the scene. Stephen murmured that it was not human. Aaliyah, puzzled, wondered what it was doing. Daniel pressed the radio to his ear, tinkering with the frequencies, but all he encountered was static that overwhelmed every channel. No music, No voices, just a continuous low hum followed by silence. The figure remained oblivious to their presence, engrossed in its activity. Suddenly, the light on its chest began to pulse more rapidly. The being straightened up and advanced toward the center of the field. In that instant, an overwhelmingly brilliant flash enveloped the area, accompanied by a resonance that vibrated beneath their feet. A final pulse of light flickered, and then the figure vanished. Silence fell once more, with no sounds or movements, leaving only the field and the night to return to their previous calmness. In a burst of adrenaline, the teenagers bolted, reaching the village within the hour to report the experience to the local police. Constable Malcolm Rudd took down their accounts, which all aligned with one another, detailing the same intriguing figure, identical actions, and the peculiar equipment. Accompanying them to the field shortly after midnight, Rudd inspected the area near where the teens indicated. His examination revealed a flattened circular patch within the barley, roughly 10 feet in diameter, the crop lying in a spiral arrangement, unbroken and uniform. In the center, 3 smaller square sections were devoid of plants, removed with precise neatness, devoid of any signs of trampling or torn roots. There were no footprints in sight. Rudd documented the findings with Polaroids, filing an incident report that categorized the event as an unexplained occurrence within a rural area. No formal investigation followed. Aaliyah had managed to snap one photo just before the flash. The image captured a vague silhouette, partially obscured by glare, standing among the barley. Though dismissed as inconclusive, she retained it along with her meticulous sketches and notes. In the ensuing days, Daniel's radio malfunctioned inexplicably, with its antenna failing completely. Stephen's compass, too, exhibited signs of magnetic disturbance, its needle drifting slowly even when held steadily. By September, local media began to take an interest in the tale. The Essex Gazette published a brief article titled, "Teenagers Claim to See Alien in Field," followed by a short television segment on Anglia TV. The coverage showcased a playful tone, leaning toward mockery. Nevertheless, it piqued the interest of Ruth Elms, a postgraduate researcher from the University of Kent. She was diligently compiling reports of close encounters across Britain and sought out the 3 witnesses. Conducting separate interviews with each, she compared their narratives and requested copies of their personal documentation. In her 1982 paper entitled Silent Harvest, Anomaly in Essex, Ruth highlighted several consistencies with other reported biological sampling encounters noted in France and rural Illinois during the same decade. In those instances, witnesses described humanoid entities extracting vegetation through advanced tools, often under the cover of night, accompanied by electromagnetic interference. The Ministry of Defense was reportedly informed of Ruth's paper, but she received no formal acknowledgement. Later that same year, 2 researchers from the British UFO Research Association visited the site. By then, the field had been harvested, yet soil samples taken from the location of the circular patch showed traces of heat exposure and a slight elevation of radiation above background levels. These findings were ultimately deemed inconclusive. Throughout the 80s and 90s, the Essex case morphed into a minor staple in fringe literature, featured in various books and late-night radio discussions, lingering in the periphery of public consciousness, but never conclusively verified or fully elucidated. Stephen ventured into a career as a civil engineer, while Daniel relocated abroad. Aaliyah pursued a path in art and education. In 2004, during a conference in Swindon, Ruth Elms presented an updated theory. She posited that events akin to the incident in Essex might signify systematic, non-hostile field collection by unknown intelligence. According to her analysis, the entities demonstrated no interest in human subjects, focusing solely on botanical materials. "It's not us they're studying," she remarked. "It's what we cultivate." In 2006, a Freedom of Information request uncovered a redacted Ministry of Defense briefing note referencing the 1979 Essex incident. The file, designated as AGR 101, detailing rural biogenic activity, contained hazy reproductions of the spiral formation and characterized the findings as credible yet unverified. In a 2010 interview with the publication 40 Times, Aaliyah emphasized that she had never required anyone's belief, affirming her certainty in what she had witnessed and the implicit understanding that they were not meant to be there. Her statement resonated with an unspoken truth, one that acknowledged that not all encounters with the unknown revolve around bright lights in the sky or mysterious vessels hovering above. Sometimes it is the life flourishing just below our feet. Even now, a rational explanation remains elusive. The Essex Field incident lingers as an unsolved mystery. A swift visitation, a specimen gathered, a luminous presence swallowed back into the shadows. What motivates the collection of plants under the cloak of night? The Immervie skiing incident, occurring on January 7, 1970. The scene over Lake Immervie, situated near Heinola, Finland, was one of bleakness and chill. The snow blanketing the open countryside lay untouched, save for two slim ski trails that extended from the woods toward the frozen expanse of the lake. For Esko Viljo, a 36-year-old caretaker, and his 24-year-old friend Ardo Hano, a mechanic, cross-country skiing was a customary pastime. They were familiar with these trails, the wide stretch along the lake's edge and the meandering path that grazed the forest's periphery. The air was sharp enough to sting exposed skin, and every stride they took sent the sound of skis gliding over the packed snow reverberating through the stillness. Numerous times they had made this journey. Nothing in the surroundings or the atmosphere indicated that this outing would diverge from the norm. As they glided side by side along a segment near the lake's border, something caught Viljo's eye. Ahead and slightly to the right, a luminous point emerged against the overcast sky. At first, he surmised it might be a reflection or perhaps an illusion induced by the pale winter sun attempting to break through the clouds, yet the light did not dissipate. Instead, it intensified. That point of illumination morphed into a sphere, its brilliance slicing through the dull gray expanse. Hano, noticing it simultaneously, slowed down, fixated on the orb as it descended towards them. An eerie silence accompanied its approach. There was no hum of an engine, no whir of rotor blades, no gusting wind. The glow appeared self-sufficient, radiating a steady brilliance without flicker or haze. Within moments, a form began to emerge from the brilliancy. Both men discerned that it was metallic and disc-shaped, no larger than a compact car, suspended in the air at the height of nearby treetops, utterly motionless. Its surface refracted the subdued winter light, gleaming in a dull silver. Before either could articulate a thought, a beam of white light shot down from its underside. The beam enveloped Viljo, casting him in a surreal illumination against the snow. He froze, not as a matter of choice, but because his body ceased to obey him. He later recounted the experience as if his muscles had been deactivated. A sudden rush of heat enveloped him, not the gentle warmth from a fire, but an intense wave penetrating both inwardly and outwardly. His vision blurred, and a metallic taste flooded his mouth. Hano remained only a few paces away, untouched by the beam, but close enough to observe the bewilderment and strain reflected on Viljo's visage. He shouted to him, but Viljo offered no response. The encounter, while brief, lasting merely seconds or perhaps a minute, felt to both men as though time itself had elongated. Then, just as swiftly as it had manifested, the beam retracted. The disk lifted slightly, angled on one edge, and surged upward into the low-hanging clouds, vanishing from their sight. The only sound that remained was the faint whoosh of displaced air dissipating into the stillness. Viljo's knees buckled, sending him crumpling onto the snow. Hano hastily moved beside him, assisting him into a seated position. Viljo's breathing became rapid, and his skin flushed. He expressed feelings of weakness and dizziness, accompanied by an odd burning sensation in his face and hands. An unpleasant, sharp smell permeated the cold air surrounding them, which Hano would later compare to a blend of sulfur and ozone. Deciding to return to town, the two men began their journey back. Viljo's movements became labored and stiff with each ski stroke, necessitating a slower pace. By the time they reached home, the twilight had surrendered to the profound darkness of winter. That evening, Viljo's condition deteriorated. His face swelled, his eyes grew bloodshot, and his skin exhibited red patches as if mildly scorched. A persistent headache plagued him, coupled with an insatiable thirst. Hanno, shaken by the occurrence, experienced only mild irritation in his eyes, which settled after a few hours. Alarmed by their encounter, they reported the incident to the local authorities. The following day, officers investigated the site where the event unfolded. The snow remained undisturbed, aside from the tracks left by their skis. Yet, in the exact position where Velio had stood, they discovered a shallow indentation and an area of loose, disturbed snow arranged in a precise circular pattern. There were no animal tracks present, no indications of machinery, nor fallen branches or debris littering the ground beneath the trees. The incident captivated the attention of Finnish Defense Forces officials who undertook discreet inquiries. Reports confirmed that no aircraft were in the vicinity that day. The weather remained stable, marked by overcast skies, light winds, and the absence of electrical storms that could explain any unusual atmospheric phenomena. Medical examinations for Velio were conducted in Hjola and later in Helsinki. The medical records, which subsequently circulated among Finnish UFO researchers, detailed symptoms reminiscent of exposure to intense heat or radiation, skin erythema, mild swelling, elevated blood pressure, and profound fatigue. While no burns or blisters were discovered, the redness on his skin lingered for several days. Blood tests ultimately indicated no notable abnormalities warranting hospitalization, and within 2 weeks, the majority of Velio's symptoms had alleviated, although he continued to report a sense of lingering fatigue. In contrast, Hanno experienced primarily a state of psychological shock following the incident. When interviewed by both police and subsequently by representatives of the Finnish UFO Research Association, he recounted details of the craft that mirrored Velio's account: a sleek metallic disc devoid of visible seams or markings, emanating a concentrated beam of light from beneath. The consistency in their testimonies encompassed all critical facets. Civilian investigators promptly descended upon the site following the event. The Finnish UFO Research Association, although relatively new at that time, regarded this case as one of the most captivating close encounters ever documented. They meticulously cataloged the scene, capturing photographs of the circular disruption left in the snow and obtaining individual statements from both men, which were later examined for congruence. Observations of their accounts revealed remarkable alignment, even in minute details such as the angle at which the craft descended and the peculiar scent that lingered in the air after its departure. Speculation burgeoned in subsequent weeks among researchers as well as local residents. Some proposed that the men may have encountered an experimental Soviet drone or reconnaissance aircraft, a hypothesis fueled by Finland's geographical proximity to the USSR amid the Cold War's heightened tensions. Others posited that the incident aligned with a rare yet expanding category of UFO encounters, where witnesses exhibited physical effects post-exposure to a beam or light emanating from an unidentified object. Indeed, the Miyarvi case bore striking parallels to incidents recorded in various countries during the late 1960s and early 1970s, where beams from hovering crafts resulted in temporary paralysis, concentrated heating, and other physiological repercussions. What distinguished the Miyarvi witnesses, however, was their status as healthy, seasoned outdoorsmen, with the encounter transpiring in daylight on open terrain, thereby reducing the likelihood of misidentifying common aerial objects. By the middle of 1970, discussions surrounding the incident had proliferated across UFO-related publications throughout Europe. The Finnish Defense Forces refrained from issuing any formal statement, merely confirming that no known aircraft were present in the vicinity at the time of the encounter. The police investigation remained open for a brief period before being quietly closed without further explanation. After several weeks, Velio resumed work, yet he hesitated to ski on that section of the lake for many months afterward. Conversely, Hanno persisted with the hobby, albeit with a newfound inclination to scrutinize the sky with heightened vigilance. Throughout the years, both men maintained fidelity to their original narrative, never embellishing it beyond their initial reports. For Finnish UFO researchers, this case continues to stand out as one of the most thoroughly documented close encounters of the second kind in the annals of the nation's history. The convergence of two credible witnesses, immediate physical effects, a distinct environmental context, and coherent testimonies sets this incident apart from most others. In retrospect, Viljo often reflected that the most disconcerting aspect was not the beam itself, but rather the notion that it had singled him out, impacting him while leaving Hanno entirely untouched. Neither individual could surmise the rationale behind this discrepancy. The question lingered. Was the beam an intentional act of surveillance, a scanning maneuver, or something else altogether? Lake Amarvi today maintains its tranquil demeanor, reminiscent of that fateful winter day. Cross-country skiers continue to trace the frozen boundaries, while the snow remains deeply blanketed in January, with the pale sun straining to penetrate the cloud cover. There are no physical remnants of the events that transpired in 1970, yet the narratives of Viljo and Hanno have persisted within Finnish archives and across international UFO literature. Thus, the case elicits no straightforward explanations, merely conjuring the image of a silent disk, a shaft of light, and a moment frozen in time when an ordinary winter excursion metamorphosed into one of Finland's most enigmatic encounters in contemporary history. The Kinross incident occurred on November 23, 1953, over Lake Superior in Michigan, USA. The night was quiet but intensely cold, with icy winds whispering over the frozen expanse of water, and stars hung like ancient lanterns in the clear sky. Radar operators at the United States Air Force's 753rd Aircraft Control and Warning Squadron, stationed at Truax Field in Madison, Wisconsin, conducted routine sweeps of the northern airspace when an unexpected blip appeared. Silent, unidentified, and charting a course southward across the Canadian border near Sault Ste. Marie, it issued no transponder signal, no radio contact, and lacked an established flight plan. It was 6:22 p.m. on November 23, 1953. Within minutes, Air Defense Command enacted standard protocol, scrambling a jet from Kinross Air Force Base in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Situated along a strategically sensitive Cold War corridor, any unauthorized aircraft naturally sparked suspicion, if not outright alarm. The interceptor dispatched was a Lockheed F-89C Scorpion, a two-seater all-weather jet fighter equipped with radar and armament, piloted by First Lieutenant Felix Manla, a 27-year-old with a wealth of interception experience. Second Lieutenant Robert L. Wilson served as his radar operator. The Scorpion ascended into the evening sky at 6:25 p.m. As Manla's aircraft climbed toward 30,000 feet, ground radar operators simultaneously tracked both the F-89 and the unidentified object. The radar bogey appeared to be traversing the lake at speeds approaching 500 miles per hour. The Scorpion pursued at full throttle when, intriguingly, something anomalous transpired. At 6:52 p.m., the two radar targets, Manla's jet and the unknown object, converged. On the radar display, two blips merged into one singular entity. Controllers anticipated that Manla would either veer away or circle back to base, yet no further signal reemerged. For a brief moment, the solitary merged blip persisted, then vanished altogether. Just like that, both aerial vehicles disappeared from the screen. Efforts to establish radio contact with the Scorpion were met with silence. Tension mounted among operators at Kinross, who initiated an immediate search and rescue operation, enlisting both American and Canadian forces. Numerous aircraft and surface vessels scoured the area across days, yielding naught but silence, no wreckage, no debris, no oil slick, and no distress signal. It was as though the jet had never been in existence at all. The official account provided by the Air Force later posited that Manla's F-89 had probably plunged into the depths of the lake while in pursuit of a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47, a standard cargo plane. However, this assertion immediately prompted several pressing questions. The RCAF emphatically denied any aircraft operating in the area at that time. No Canadian aircraft corresponded with the flight path noted in the radar logs. And why would a seasoned pilot like Monclaw fail to recognize a C-47 either on radar or visually? His mission was neither daring nor experimental. It was merely a standard operation. Yet, both Monlaw and Wilson vanished without a shred of evidence. Whispers of speculation rippled through the base. Within the ranks of airmen, some began to speculate about UFOs, while others posited that either radar failure or spatial disorientation had triggered a disastrous collision. Yet, no one could decipher the mystery of why nothing had been recovered. There were no fragments, no signals, no trace of fuel tanks floating on the surface. Aircraft wreckage does not simply disappear, even in the abyss of deep water. Then there was the anomaly concerning the radar. A multitude of independent operators had observed the merger of the two radar blips. Not a crash, not a disappearance, but rather a convergence, an actual joining of signals. Such a phenomenon was extraordinarily rare, even unprecedented. In the years that ensued, UFO researchers latched onto the Kinross incident as potential evidence of a mid-air encounter with an unidentified flying object. The case was frequently referenced by early civilian UFO organizations like the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which argued that military forces were engaging with unfamiliar crafts and losing pilots in the process. Complicating the narrative were peculiar documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests many years later. An internal memo from Air Defense Command alluded enigmatically to the vanishings, categorizing the unidentified target as a bogey. Another document highlighted the absence of wreckage and confirmed the radar visual convergence. In 1960, a book penned by UFO researcher Donald Coe rekindled public interest in the case. A former Marine pilot with connections at the Pentagon, Coe asserted that the Air Force was engaged in a cover-up regarding encounters with extraterrestrial vehicles. He argued that the Kinross incident was one of the clearest exemplifications of something being taken, aircraft, crew, and all. Eventually, the Air Force augmented its official narrative, suggesting that the F-89 likely descended into Lake Superior, attributing the absence of wreckage to the lake's profound depth and poor visibility. That assertion held truth, as Lake Superior ranks among the deepest and coldest lakes globally, having claimed ships and planes throughout history. However, the original radar operators remained resolute in their accounts. One of them, who remained unnamed for decades, later recounted in an interview that he had observed the two targets converge. There was no divergence. It was as if one target absorbed the other. In 2006, a group named the Great Lakes Dive Company declared they had identified the wreck of the F-89 using sonar in Lake Superior. They shared images and coordinates online, announcing intentions to mount a recovery initiative. Yet, in a matter of weeks, the group seemingly vanished. Their website went dark, and attempts to reach them went unanswered. Speculation arose. Was it a hoax, or had they stumbled upon something they were meant to avoid? To this day, Monla's Scorpion has not been conclusively located. The families of both airmen are left grappling with uncertainty. No remains were ever found. Not a single Mayday call was transmitted. Moreover, the flight logs from that night, alongside vital sections of radar data, remain classified or mysteriously missing. It is unequivocal that something transpired on that frigid November night over Lake Superior. A trained pilot and radar operator departed on a routine intercept mission, locking onto an unidentified target. Their radar signatures intertwined, and then they vanished. What remains most unsettling is not solely the loss of the aircraft, but also the implication, never definitively proven, never officially acknowledged, that something in the sky possessed the capability to render another object invisible. A craft devoid of a flight plan, lacking a transponder, and with a mission that concluded in silence. Some speculate that Monla inadvertently drew too close to a clandestine U.S. or Canadian project, paying a grave price for it. Others argue for a more straightforward explanation, an accident followed by ineffective recovery efforts. Yet, the particulars contradict such comforting narratives. The radar convergence, the missing wreckage, the Canadian denial, the silence from both governments. In an era when pilots were urged to intercept unknowns with decisiveness, perhaps Monlaus encountered the wrong object at an inopportune moment. And perhaps that object was not from this world. The Kremen's interference, March 21, 1983, Kremenets, Ukrainian SSR, Soviet Union. The freight train unhurriedly traversed the frozen pine hills of western Ukraine, its wheels whispering along the icy rails. Outside, the forest lay still and dark. The Kremen line was quiet, lacking junctions, signals, or any other traffic, merely an expanse of snow-covered tracks stretching through the woods. It was an ordinary night run from Zhytomyr to Lviv, until something ahead began to deviate from the norm. At the controls was Vasil Korol, a robust man with a graying mustache and 30 years of experience. His assistant, Dmytro Ivanchuk, examined delivery sheets beneath a red reading lamp. During these journeys, they spoke little. The work was familiar, steady, predictable, and silent. Then the routine shattered. The cabin lights dimmed, not in sporadic flickers, but gradually, as though power was being siphoned away. The voltmeter dipped, then oil pressure followed suit. The digital signal alert, usually confirming track clearance, devolved into static and ceased functioning. Vasil attempted the radio, but only silence responded, interspersed with a hiss. A deep hum emerged, subtle at first, yet it was not from the outside. Rather, it originated within the cabin itself, as if the walls were resonating. Suddenly, the brakes engaged involuntarily, prompting the train to slow to a complete halt near kilometer post 2041, deep within the snow-blanketed woods. An eerie quiet enveloped them. No fans, no gauges, only the muffled hiss of settling systems and the unsettling sensation that they were not alone. Vasil eased the window open, and an icy gust rushed in, ushering along with it a soft amber glow filtering through the treetops ahead. This light bore no relation to any rail signals. Approximately 100 meters down the track, suspended just above the rails, hovered a sphere 4 meters in diameter, radiating a luminescence akin to molten glass. It remained stationary, silent, and undulating. Around it, the air shimmered slightly, reminiscent of heat waves. Dmytro leaned closer, whispering, "It's not moving." Neither engineer dared to step outside, not out of fear, but rather a curious, heavy stillness that stifled the cabin's atmosphere. Vasil would later articulate this odd feeling as akin to being submerged in water, where time seems to decelerate. The radio remained silent, while the audio recorder inexplicably ceased functioning. That particular section of tape would ultimately be found erased. For nearly 7 minutes, the sphere lingered in place without movement or sound, merely pulsating light, casting an unusual dark shadow beneath it where the snow appeared to dim. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, it vanished, simply gone, as if a light had been extinguished. Silence enveloped the scene. Suddenly, the instruments flickered back to life. Gauges illuminated, the dashboard rebooted, and digital signals resumed. They managed to establish contact with the dispatcher, who instructed them to remain in position. "Technical team is en route," came the voice. However, what arrived hours later was far from the anticipated technical team. 2 olive-green military trucks and a black sedan approached quietly on the frozen stretch of the track. None of the vehicles bore insignia. Figures emerged clad in heavy overcoats, fur hats pulled low against the cold. One displayed a red badge inscribed with Cyrillic letters, UYL, Special Department. Most railway workers understood the implications. It denoted the KGB, the primary state security agency of the Soviet Union. Accompanying them were officers from the Ministry of Defense's ETH Directorate, a unit recognized for its work on military signaling systems and electromagnetic monitoring. They moved with urgency, illuminating the area, navigating the track with portable meters, cordoning off the vicinity without a word to Vasil or Dmytro. The 2 engineers were detached without explanation, each ushered into the back of a truck to face questioning under harsh floodlights by men identified only by their titles: Captain, Senior Investigator, Colonel. Their inquiries were straightforward and meticulous. How long did the object hover? What color was the light? Did it produce any sound? Were there any physical sensations? Vasil recounted the profound stillness, the heaviness of the air. Dimitro described a sensation in his ears resembling that of descending in an aircraft. By dawn, both men found themselves relocated to a government facility in Kremené. There, officials from the Ministry of Transport awaited them. They presented Vasil and Dimitro with pre-prepared incident forms, listing potential causes such as ionospheric interference and temporary geomagnetic disruption. One document alluded to an atmospheric experiment conducted by the Ministry of Defense. They were instructed to sign these reports, and they did. Concurrently, dispatcher Prolenko received a sealed directive mandating the cessation of track segments 2033 through 2045 for winter stress analysis. He was also ordered to revise prior logbook entries by hand. From that point forward, typewritten records were strictly prohibited. Back at the scene, soldiers meticulously dismantled a segment of track where the sphere had hovered. The steel rails were extracted and quietly loaded onto one of the trucks. A group of forestry workers who had observed from a distance through the trees later reported hearing a high-pitched tone during the event, while some claimed to have glimpsed flickering lights amid the trees. None of them were ever officially interrogated. By noon, every last trace had vanished. The lights, the trucks, the men, all disappeared. The forest settled back into its customary tranquility. Vasil and Dimitro were enjoined not to discuss the incident, not with colleagues, nor with family members. They complied without question. Though no formal reprimand followed, their lives underwent subtle transformations. Vasil, despite his immaculate record, found himself bypassed for a long-anticipated award. Dimitro was reassigned to a remote switching yard in Dnipropetrovsk. Dispatcher Lysenko transitioned to a clerical position in Lut within a year. No article surfaced in the Soviet press. There were no mentions in rail transport bulletins. Officially, the event had never taken place, but memories lingered. In 1998, a Ukrainian researcher named Mykola Pivin succeeded in locating both Vasil and Dimitro. He conducted separate interviews in their homes, preserving their recollections 15 years after the fact. The two accounts aligned, with details echoing the pulsing amber light and the sensation of time stretching. Pivin eventually published the findings in a modest Ukrainian journal devoted to anomalous phenomena, garnering little initial attention. This changed in 2006, coinciding with a surge of declassified Soviet documents released through an initiative for archival transparency. Among these was a memo dated March 22, 1983, from the Ministry of Transport referencing instrument failure and unauthorized aerial presence. The coordinates cited in the memo corresponded precisely with Vasil's private rail log. Another document included photographs taken during the military cleanup, revealing gravel ballast beneath the removed rail fused into clusters reminiscent of glass. A note from a military laboratory estimated temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius, yet no signs of fire damage were present. The surrounding snow remained intact. No melting, no soot, no burn marks. Included, too, was a one-page observatory report from Ternopil, situated 60 kilometers to the south, which recorded an unexplained electromagnetic surge coinciding with the time frame during which the train had stalled. It had been categorized as a sensor error and subsequently disregarded. The most haunting document was a brief memo from the KGB's 5th Directorate, addressed to the General Directorate of State Security. It read, "Unexplained aerial incursion over non-strategic infrastructure. EM signature consistent with high-altitude test. Civilian witnesses were debriefed with the conclusion reached that the situation required no further escalation." That familiar phrase, "no further escalation," echoed in the annals of anomalous encounters, recalling its earlier application during the Petrozavodsk incident in 1977, when numerous residents in Karelia reported seeing a luminous object suspended above the city, only for the government to dismiss it as an optical illusion caused by the rising sun. Yet, that night there was no sunrise illuminating Kremenet, only the stillness of snow and the enveloping darkness, punctuated by something ominous hovering silently. Today, trains continue to traverse that forest corridor, but the section where the event unfolded was modernized and replaced in 1986. No remnants linger, no plaques or markers, nothing to suggest history changed in that place. However, the tale persists softly among seasoned engineers. They caution the newer crews by saying if your dashboard fails near kilometer 241, remain in the cab. Just wait, and if something appears on the tracks, glowing, silent, observing, do not assume it is intended for you. Vasil Koral later confided to Mykola Piven in a retrospective interview years later that he believed it was not us it sought out. We were merely in its path. In October of 1971, the Langenaren Lake Constance intrusion took shape, a vivid puzzlement above Lake Constance in Baden-Württemberg, West Germany. The waters of the lake seldom stirred under the cloak of night, transforming on windless autumn evenings into a flawless mirror. The surface became so tranquil that it reflected the heavens with perfect clarity, making the stars seem as if they lay just beneath. On Tuesday, October 12th of that year, an extraordinary event transpired quietly above the lake. The skies were clear and devoid of moonlight, with temperatures beginning their descent into chillier realms. From the vantage point of the second-floor balcony of the Langan Customs House, Border Police Officer Ralph Dan was diligently completing his routine shift notes beneath the glow of a single reading lamp. This building, positioned precisely above the waterline, was part of a post-war joint border surveillance collaboration established between West Germany and Switzerland. Dan, having manned the post for 7 years without a noteworthy breach, found himself on that night captivated by something out of the ordinary. Out of the edge of his peripheral vision, a glow emerged low over the lake, not from the distant horizon, but at a height that exceeded any passing boat's running lights. Pausing mid-sentence, he set down his pen and stepped outside. The glow hovered steadily above the still water, approximately 100 meters from the shore, hovering at a height above the surface that was just as remarkable. At first, Dan pondered whether it might be a misidentified aircraft light or potentially a helicopter, but it emitted no distinctive noise, and its form was unmistakably non-aeronautical, elliptical, with a soft illumination emanating from within, hovering with an unearthly steadiness. The air remained so still that any rotors should have produced a sound, yet silence enveloped the scene. The object drifted slightly to the side, then remained stationary as though tethered by an invisible force. Alarmed yet composed, Dan leaned over the railing of the balcony and called down to his colleague, Officer Hartwig Steiner, who emerged from the lower floor's entryway in seconds. Dan gestured toward the glow, and the two officers watched it in rapt silence, alternating between their naked eyes and a pair of binoculars reserved for scrutinizing the shoreline. Steiner later characterized the object not as luminous in the manner of a searchlight, but rather as if the very air surrounding it was aglow. It cast no beam, nor did it produce a shadow upon the water's surface. Yet, it was unmistakably visible against the starlit backdrop. For more than 4 minutes it remained in sight, unwavering, motionless. Then, as if prompted by some unseen directive, it suddenly tilted upward and soared into the night sky, vanishing in seconds. There was no trailing light, no sound, no explosion of brightness, only absence. Without delay, the officers acted. Dan logged the incident immediately and contacted the Regional Air Traffic Control Center in Friedrichshafen, located about 13 kilometers to the west. Their response was swift and direct. No scheduled flights had passed through the area, and no aircraft had been recorded in that sector for several hours. Likewise, civilian radar showed no anomalies at the time of their sighting. The following morning, both officers submitted formal incident reports to the Bundesgrenzschutz Federal Border Guard. Within 36 hours, a discreet review was launched. An investigator from Stuttgart arrived at the customs house to interview the officers. Each was questioned individually and requested to create sketches of their observations. Though their drawing styles differed, an uncanny similarity emerged in the shapes, sizes, and positions depicted above the lake. The internal examination was brief, yielding no conclusive results. On October 16th, the officers received a typed memo from the Ministry of the Interior. No known aircraft activity aligned with their observations. Meteorological and astronomical conditions were determined to be non-contributory. The incident would be filed without further action. There was no suggestion for follow-up, no indication of misperceptions, simply a quiet resolution. However, the officers were not the sole witnesses that night. Later that same week, a civilian technician named Klaus Betz, who ran a modest radio repair workshop from a boat shed located 3 kilometers down the shoreline, reported a brief and peculiar interference while evaluating VHF signal clarity near the lake. According to a note he ultimately submitted to a regional bulletin, Betz described an abrupt surge of static across all signal bands, followed by a chilling silence, no return frequency, no oscillation. When he ventured outside to inspect the antenna alignment, he caught sight of what he described as a warm light ascending directly upward. He chose not to file a formal report, yet his note endured within a local technicians' guild journal. Across the water in the Swiss lakeside town of Rorschach, an elderly woman walking her dog along the shore conveyed to her neighbor that she had seen a small sun rise from the lake and then vanish into the heavens. Although her account went undocumented, it surfaced several years later within a local oral history archive. The collection of loosely affiliated accounts, all reflecting an upward trajectory yet lacking coordination, eventually garnered the attention of a NATO liaison officer stationed in Beverburg. A piece published in 1995 within Aviation Review Europe briefly acknowledged the Langen sighting during a closed-door discussion concerning uncorrelated visual radar anomalies across Central Europe. No formal inquiry ensued, and the topic was shelved and classified without further documentation. More than 10 years later, in 1983, a request tied to the Freedom of Information Act, aligned with Germany's early informational Freiheitsgesetz legislation, yielded a file that mentioned the Langen incident. This document was minimalistic, comprising only hand-drawn diagrams by Dan and Steiner, alongside a solitary internal memo laden with redactions. This memo noted phenomena observed by trained individuals from a fixed position with no radar validation. The visual account deviated from known meteorological or astronomical objects, and no atmospheric anomalies were logged. The case did not progress to NATO command. By that time, the incident had slipped from the realm of official recollection. The Customs House had transformed into a historical exhibit showcasing regional border history. The second-floor balcony where DNA had once stood remained intact, equipped merely with a rusting latch and a view that has scarcely changed over the span of 5 decades. Dan retired in 1993, and in a rare local interview 8 years later, he revisited the event with striking clarity. He recalled that they did not witness something ambiguous, they saw something unmistakably real. It was neither an aircraft nor an optical illusion. They both perceived the same occurrence. Even now he remains uncertain about what it was. The case never achieved prominence in national news, it avoided sensationalism. Instead, it simply lingered where it initially began, in the stillness between 2 trained individuals, a dark body of water, and a mute object that materialized and disappeared without attracting attention. Thus, it was documented. And, subsequently, shelved. Yet, the entity they observed that evening exhibited behaviors that no known civilian or military aircraft could replicate at that time. The sudden vertical ascent, the silence, the stationary hovering without any visible lifting mechanism, and the absence of radar detection persisted as enigmas. There were no subsequent sightings, no added reports. The lake reverted to its characteristic calmness. However, for a few fleeting moments on that October night in 1971, something loomed over Lake Constance, effortlessly, soundlessly, and without identity. It was witnessed by men trained not to fantasize, and it vanished as quietly as it appeared. It arrived, it hovered, and then departed just like that. The Longford Bridge sighting in September 1976. In the mid-70s, Longford Bridge, spanning the Coventry Canal in Warwickshire, was an unremarkable thoroughfare, bordered by hedges, dim street lamps, and the subtle hum of late-night traffic from the adjacent A44. Nothing hinted that it would evolve into a subtly chronicled Cold War-era UFO event. On a September evening in 1976, Michael Hughes, a 27-year-old delivery driver from Bedworth, was returning home after completing his final drop in Nunn. The roads were devoid of traffic, the air crisp, and the scent of moist earth lingered following a brief shower earlier that evening. Approaching the turnoff to Longford Bridge, he noticed an unusual luminescence ahead. Not the blinding glare associated with headlights, but something softer, suspended above the canal. Initially, Hughes presumed it was merely a reflection from a nearby industrial yard's floodlight. Yet, as he drew nearer, the light appeared self-contained, lacking any visible source on the ground. Gradually slowing his van, he pulled over just before reaching the bridge and exited. The light hovered approximately 30 feet above the water's surface, steady and bright white with a faint bluish halo. At first difficult to pinpoint, its shape became evident as it tilted slightly, revealing a disc-like form no larger than a small automobile. Below it, a diffuse column of light extended downward, reaching toward the water's surface and rippling subtly, reminiscent of heat haze. Hughes later reflected that the canal water directly beneath the beam shimmered unnaturally, despite the stillness that encompassed the night. For several seconds, everything remained motionless. Then, unexpectedly, the object glided silently across the canal, passing directly above him. He sensed a tingling pressure in the air. It was not painful, but sufficient to raise the hair on his arms. As Hughes remained transfixed, another vehicle approached from the opposite direction. The driver, a middle-aged woman named Jean Turner, slowed nearly to a halt upon seeing the light. They exchanged a fleeting glance, yet neither uttered a word. Both were riveted to the spectacle before them. The disc drifted toward the eastern bank, pausing for a moment above a cluster of willow trees before ascending vertically. Hughes estimated its ascent to about 200 feet before it rapidly accelerated away at an angle, vanishing toward the south within a mere 5 seconds. Trembling, Hughes returned to his van and drove straight home, but slumber eluded him. The following morning, he resolved to call the local police station, not to file an official report, but merely to inquire whether anyone else had observed unusual lights the previous night. To his astonishment, the desk sergeant did not dismiss his inquiry. Instead, he informed Hughes that a patrol car in nearby Shawl had also reported an atypical aerial light at roughly the same moment, one that moved too quickly and erratically to be categorized as an aircraft. This call ultimately resulted in a detailed interview later that day with a uniformed officer who meticulously recorded Hughes's account. The officer indicated that the Ministry of Defense occasionally reviewed such accounts, though feedback was seldom provided. It was weeks later, through an acquaintance at the Coventry Telegraph, that Hughes discovered another individual had observed the same object. Jean Turner, the woman driving in the adjacent vehicle, had submitted a remarkably similar description to the newspaper, portraying the object as suspended silently in the air, indifferent to their gaze, before vanishing without warning. Strangely, the report was never published. Instead, it was discreetly directed to RAF Cosford, which was responsible for investigating specific aerial incidents in the area. Following that moment, the trail appeared to dissipate. Although Hughes continued with his daily routine, occasionally sharing the details of the sighting with friends, he never pursued the matter any further. Turner, by all indications, exhibited a greater reluctance to discuss the incident publicly. However, in the shadows, the Longford Bridge case was discreetly acknowledged within a series of internal Ministry of Defense memos, fragments of which emerged decades later due to Freedom of Information Act requests. These released documents, heavily redacted, confirmed that an unidentified aerial phenomenon was reported by 2 independent civilian witnesses on that noteworthy night. The memo also makes mention of a potential connection to 2 additional visual reports from the West Midlands occurring on the same evening, though specifics remain elusive. One paragraph stands out prominently. There was no radar confirmation from either RAF Nidus Head or RAF Bulmer. The phenomenon was observed from a close distance, demonstrating a stable hover and vertical ascent while generating no detectable sound. Moreover, the meteorological explanations appeared inapplicable. Labeled as unexplained, the mid-1970s represented a particularly active era for British UFO sightings, though the majority did not enter public consciousness. The Ministry of Defense had established what it termed the Defense Intelligence Staff UFO Desk, a small office dedicated to the collection and cataloging of reports received from police, RAF stations, and occasionally the public. While many accounts were swiftly dismissed as due to aircraft, meteors, or atmospheric events, those involving multiple witnesses, tangible objects, or unusual maneuvers were recorded with greater scrutiny. RAF Cosford, the station to which the Longford Bridge case was sent, served not only as a training facility but also functioned as a regional center for evaluating aerial incidents. When a sighting was deemed credible but lacked an immediate explanation, Cosford's protocol was to assess its significance for national defense, essentially determining whether the encountered object might represent a foreign aircraft or technology. If no threat was identified, the case was generally filed away without further investigation. The absence of radar confirmation from major facilities like Knightis Head and Bulmer meant that the Ministry of Defense would categorize the sighting as of no defense significance, which did not imply the event didn't occur, but rather that it presented no identifiable military risk. This classification frequently led to the closure of cases even when substantial eyewitness accounts were present. What adds to the intrigue of the Longford Bridge sighting is its location, close to Coventry's industrial area, where numerous defense contractors operated during the 1970s. Additionally, it sat along a low-altitude approach corridor occasionally utilized by military helicopters, making the insistence of both witnesses that the object produced no sound, not even the quiet thump of rotor blades, all the more remarkable. The following day, as detailed in another redacted memo, 2 personnel in plain clothes visited the area. Hughes, passing over the bridge on his commute, noticed them positioned by the canal with measuring instruments. One appeared to be taking readings along the waterline, while the other sketched the bridge's architectural features. They did not approach him, nor did he choose to stop. Residents later reported that for several nights following this, a small patrol boat was observed operating within that stretch of the canal, although no one could confirm its relevance. Such discrete site investigations were not uncommon. The Ministry of Defense occasionally dispatched small teams to examine locations for potential physical traces, soil disruptions, magnetic anomalies, or radiation disturbances. In the 1970s, these teams sometimes employed portable Geiger counters, compasses for assessing magnetic deviations, and Polaroid cameras for documenting the sites. If any data was collected at Longford Bridge, it never surfaced in the declassified files. By the time the Ministry of Defense's records were opened to the public in the early 2000s, the Longford Bridge incident had effectively vanished from the collective memory. Buried alongside more sensational cases, it garnered little attention beyond local interest. Yet for those acquainted with British close encounters of the 1970s, its blend of low-altitude observation, multiple witnesses, and evident Ministry of Defense interest renders it noteworthy. The file's concluding page, dated late October 1976, includes a succinct closing note stating that no further inquiries were warranted, that witness credibility had been assessed as high, and that the object's behavior remained without satisfactory explanation. Today, the bridge endures, as it did, a modest crossing over tranquil waters with traffic flowing steadily in both directions. There is no plaque, no local folklore, nor any lingering public narrative. However, for 2 drivers on a tranquil September evening in 1976, it became the site of an encounter that was quietly documented, but ultimately filed away as unexplained. While the official documentation may have distilled the event to a mere paragraph and a statistical entry, for Hughes and Turner, the sighting represented a direct and irrefutable moment. A bright, silent object hovered where nothing should exist, moving in ways that no aircraft they recognized could replicate. Decades later, the government's file communicated more through its omissions than its disclosures, leaving the incident as just another unresolved thread within Britain's understated UFO history. The Manises UFO incident unfolded on the 11th of November 1979 in the vicinity of Valencia, Spain. What was intended to be a routine flight from Mallorca to Tenerife turned into an extraordinary encounter. Captain Francisco Javier Liardo de Yata, an adept pilot with extensive experience at Transport Aéreo Español, had already navigated several segments of that day's itinerary without incident. Flight JK-297, a Super Caravel SE-210 jet, carried 109 passengers as it glided steadily over the dark expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. The meteorological conditions were ideal, the night was clear, and the atmosphere remained calm, creating an environment where the only sound that punctuated the cockpit was the reassuring hum of the engines. However, this tranquility was abruptly shattered by the emergence of two brilliant red lights off the starboard side. Initially appearing distant, the lights accelerated toward the aircraft at a speed that did not align with any known air traffic in the region. Their brilliance and distinctive hue were not reminiscent of the navigation lights commonly seen on commercial or private aircraft. Captain Liardo de Yata and his fellow crew members exchanged uneasy glances. This anomaly was neither part of the flight plan nor detectable on their radar. Prompted by a growing sense of urgency, the captain reached out to Barcelona Air Control to verify the presence of any nearby aircraft. The swift response confirmed the absence of any traffic within that sector. Nonetheless, the ominous lights persisted, drawing closer and maintaining an altitude that mirrored that of the Caravel. Faced with a mounting risk of collision and no identification from air traffic control, Liardo de Yata resolved to take evasive action, subtly altering the flight path while keeping a watchful eye on the objects. In a remarkable display, the lights mimicked the jet's maneuver, holding their position relative to the aircraft. With the imminent threat of a collision becoming increasingly palpable, the captain conveyed to the passengers that a diversion to Valencia Airport was necessary for precautionary technical reasons. This marked a historic moment, as it represented the first instance in Spanish civil aviation where a commercial airplane adjusted its course and initiated a landing procedure due to an unidentified aerial entity. As the Caravel began its descent toward Valencia, the lights continued their pursuit, adjusting their position, yet refusing to recede into the night. Crew members later noted that the objects emanated an unwavering intensity, devoid of the flicker or strobe pattern typical of traditional aircraft lights. Additionally, they appeared considerable in size, resembling large luminous spheres rather than recognizable machines. Meanwhile, air traffic personnel at the Valencia airport began to observe these unusual lights in the sky as well. Some accounts described the objects as moving independently from one another, while others remarked on their ability to shadow the incoming Caravel's trajectory. By the time the jet safely touched down, the objects had retreated slightly but remained visible, ensuring a military response was imminent. At Los Llanos Air Base in Albite, the Spanish Air Force took decisive action, dispatching two Mirage F-1 fighter jets to investigate the unidentified phenomenon. Captain Fernando Camura, one of the pilots, was given the coordinates of the last known sighting based on reports from civil aviation authorities and radar data from Torre de Arardos, located near Madrid. The directive was explicit: intercept and identify the unknown aerial objects. Shortly after taking off, Captain Camura achieved a visual contact with a luminous shape glittering in the distance. Its outline proved elusive, displaying initially as a point of intense white light that occasionally shifted to a reddish hue. Yet, each time the mirage closed the distance, the object exhibited an unexplainable acceleration, retreating rapidly beyond the fighter's maximum speed capabilities. The radar managed to lock onto the object briefly, only for it to vanish suddenly from the display. At one juncture during the pursuit, the camera documented the object executing an abrupt altitude change, ascending thousands of feet in mere seconds and subsequently maintaining a hovering position before accelerating once again. Repeated attempts to intercept were met with the same disconcerting pattern: fleeting radar contact, followed by a sudden maneuver and swift disappearance. After over an hour of frustrating pursuit, the Mirage pilots were compelled to return to base due to dwindling fuel reserves. In the meantime, additional reports surfaced from various locations along Spain's eastern coast, detailing strange lights flickering over the sea. Some were observed traveling at high speeds, while others appeared to remain stationary for extensive periods before abruptly disappearing from sight. None of these sightings correlated with conventional aircraft, nor did they match any filed flight plans. In light of these occurrences, the Spanish Air Force initiated a formal investigation. Within days, a comprehensive report was generated, which would ultimately be designated as Expediente Manis. The documentation included statements from Captain Liardo de Yata, his crew, air traffic controllers, ground witnesses, and the military pilots involved in the interception ordeal. Radar logs from Torre de Arardos, alongside records from other stations, were meticulously compiled and cross-referenced with civilian accounts. The investigation confirmed that the diversion of Flight JK-297 stemmed from an unidentified airborne phenomenon that posed a potential collision hazard. Witness accounts from both civilian and military personnel, in conjunction with radar validation of unknown traffic in the vicinity, lent credence to the report. The military analysis concluded that the observed objects displayed flight attributes inconsistent with any known aircraft technology, including rapid accelerations, swift altitude changes, and the capability to hover for considerable durations, without discernible means of support. Consequently, public interest surged following the incident, fueled by news outlets that quickly disseminated sensational headlines about mysterious lights compelling an emergency landing. Spanish newspapers showcased vivid accounts of the event, while television programs invited aviation specialists and former military officials to analyze what had transpired. The significance of the incident was further solidified by the stature of the witnesses involved: seasoned pilots, trained radar operators, and diligent air traffic controllers, all individuals vested in their reputations. For the passengers aboard Flight JK-297, the revelations surfaced only in retrospect. At the time of their diversion, they had been informed it was due to a routine precaution, leaving many astonished upon learning later that an unidentified aerial object had been tracked by both civil and military authorities. The Spanish Ministry of Defense eventually issued a public statement recognizing that an unidentified entity of unknown origin had indeed been observed and pursued. No explanation was provided, nor was there any indication of foreign military or civilian aircraft incursion found in the aftermath. The official statements, marked by their careful choice of words, dodged any speculation about the essence or origin of the mysterious objects. As the months passed, researchers delved into the archives of Expediente Manis, highlighting the meticulous nature of the documentation within. This particular case was not merely notable for the diversion of a passenger flight. It also stood out due to the swift and coordinated response from both civil and military authorities. It subsequently became a pivotal reference point within European UFO research, frequently cited as a striking instance where safety protocols, official reports, and numerous witness accounts harmonized. Captain Liardo de Yata advanced in his career unembellished by the episode. When posed with questions during interviews, he expressed in no uncertain terms that his choice to divert the flight stemmed purely from a commitment to passenger safety and the inability to identify the encroaching objects. He stressed that the phenomena were not figments of the imagination or atmospheric illusions. They were real, present, and tracked on radar. Captain Fernando Camara, who piloted the Mirage, would later voice his exasperation at being unable to intercept the unidentified objects. He conveyed the sentiment that it demonstrated flight capabilities that no aircraft he was familiar with could match. This assertion bolstered the military's own evaluation that the phenomenon exhibited unconventional aerodynamic capabilities. Despite the wealth of information amassed, the official conclusion ultimately left the matter unresolved. The files have remained stored within the archives of the Ministry of Defense, partially declassified years later, yet still lacking additional explanations. Presently, The incident surrounding Expediente Manese is regarded as an open-ended case. In the extensive chronicle of aviation, this encounter stands as a rare instance where a UFO sighting explicitly influenced flight operations in a documented and credible manner. The aggregation of in-flight sightings, radar tracking, eyewitness accounts, and military engagement produces a multi-layered account that resists simple dismissal. More than 4 decades later, those who were part of the event continue to remember the night with striking clarity. The serene Mediterranean, the sudden eruption of brilliant lights, the urgent maneuver to divert the flight, and the futile endeavor to pursue. This case remains a touchstone for researchers, a stark reminder that the unknown can intrude upon even the most ordinary of flights. On that night in Spain's skies, an entity moved with purpose and intellect. Yet, it eluded not only the fastest jets, but left no evidence on the sea beneath it. There was no debris, no explanation, only the lingering memory of lights that compelled an airliner to alter its path and captured the attention of an entire nation's air traffic network. The incident at Manise continues to resonate not only in the annals of Expediente Manise, but also within the quiet conviction of those who witnessed it, that whatever traversed the skies beside them that November night was real, an unwelcome visitor, and unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The night of December 1st, 1987, marked the siege of Ilkamore in Yorkshire, England. It was uncomfortably cold when Philip Spencer ventured out shortly after 7 in the morning. The fog rested persistently low over the moors. Frost traced intricate patterns across every blade of grass, and silence enveloped the Yorkshire hills. A former police officer turned security guard, Spencer had taken a morning off for a visit to his father-in-law. In his possession was a camera with hopes of capturing the haunting winter beauty of Ilkley Moor. However, what he ultimately recorded, at least in his assertion, was something entirely different, something beyond explanation. Earlier that year, he and his family had moved to Yorkshire. Spencer was a man of few words, known for his seriousness and logical demeanor. He did not strike one as someone prone to wild stories. His solid reputation preceded him, and those familiar with him described him as dependable and level-headed, far from one given to flights of fancy. That morning, as he made his way along the path into the moorland, a compass and a camera rested in his coat pocket. The poor light and limited visibility stretched only a few hundred feet at best. His journey was intended to be straightforward: cross the moor and catch the train to his father-in-law's residence. However, within half an hour, Spencer asserted that everything shifted dramatically. He ascended a modest ridge and spotted something peculiar just ahead. A figure, approximately 4 feet tall, crouched with an oversized head and elongated limbs. Initially, he presumed it might be a child. But as it turned to face him, he quickly dismissed that notion. Its skin, he described, possessed a pale greenish-gray hue, and its face was undeniably not human. With large black eyes and a small mouth, devoid of a discernible nose, the creature moved with astonishing speed, prompting Spencer to instinctively raise his camera and capture a photo. The figure spun and dashed up the hillside, disappearing over the ridge. In a state of shock, Spencer chased after it, reaching the summit mere seconds later, only to find the figure had vanished. What froze him in his tracks next was even more astonishing. In the valley below hovered a large metallic craft, silent and emitting a faint blue luminescence from beneath. According to Spencer, it lifted gradually, tilted to one side, and seamlessly disappeared into the fog. There was no sound, no rush of air, just an instantaneous vanishing act. Disoriented, he reached for his compass and realized something was amiss. The needle whirled chaotically, seemingly disoriented and unable to orient itself towards north. His watch had halted as well. He lost track of how much time elapsed, but the feeling lingered that it was merely minutes. Still reeling from the encounter, he hastened across the moor and boarded a later train than originally intended. Upon arriving at his father-in-law's home, he glanced at the time. It was nearly 2 hours later than he had anticipated, and he found himself unable to rationalize the discrepancy. 2 hours unaccounted for. In the days that followed, Spencer found it impossible to move past the bewildering experience. When he developed the film, he was shocked to discover that the photograph had indeed captured something remarkable. Though grainy and out of focus, he could still discern a figure, humanoid, short, with a bulbous head and peculiar proportions. It stood mid-stride on a gravel path. Skeptics argued that what appeared in the photograph was merely a person in a suit, or perhaps a well-orchestrated hoax. However, the image was sent to various photographic analysis laboratories, including one at Kodak. While experts failed to classify the figure, they verified its authenticity and confirmed that the image had remained untouched. The negatives revealed no traces of double exposure or alterations. The British UFO Research Association, known as BUFFA, expressed considerable interest. They arranged for Spencer to participate in hypnotic regression, eager to uncover if he could retrieve memories of the missing time. The results were disconcerting. During hypnosis, Spencer recounted that after he captured the photograph and ascended the hill, he found himself engulfed in a bright light and lifted into the air. He depicted feeling immobilized before awakening within a sterile metallic chamber. He recounted how beings examined him, drawing blood, studying his eyes, testing his limbs. During this unsettling experience, he witnessed images projected onto the walls, showcasing war, environmental ruin, and serene landscapes. He received telepathic messages indicating that he would forget until the proper moment arrived. Subsequently, he was returned to the moor, bewildered, akin to awakening from an enigmatic dream. Many dismissed the results of the hypnosis, attributing them to suggestion or pure imagination, yet others noted the striking resemblance to accounts from numerous alleged abductees worldwide. Spencer never sought notoriety or aimed to capitalize on the encounter. He declined media interviews and maintained anonymity for several years. His identity ultimately became public only much later, long after the occurrence had passed. The photograph he had taken stands today as one of the most contentious and enduring pieces of purported UFO evidence in the United Kingdom. It has been dissected, enhanced, and debated for decades. Some insist that it merely captures an illusion of light, a misidentified shrub, or even the antics of an individual in costume. Yet, it has never been definitively discredited. The location, Ilkley Moor, is steeped in its own folklore. Locals have historically recounted tales of unusual lights flitting across the sky, livestock mysteriously vanishing, and eerie noises echoing in the night. In 1987, just weeks before Spencer's encounter, several residents reported seeing odd lights hovering above the moor, including one witness who described a luminous sphere silently gliding over her home. None of these incidents were captured by national media. They remained within the community, largely dismissed, until Spencer came forward. What renders the Ilkley Moor case particularly compelling to investigators is not solely the photograph or the regression, but rather the individual at the center of it. He exhibited no previous interest in UFO phenomena. He did not follow such matters closely, working instead in law enforcement, a realm grounded in skepticism. Those who conversed with him noted his unwavering narrative, the discomfort he exhibited regarding attention, and his reluctance to exaggerate. He never altered his story. Years later, Spencer distanced himself from the town and opted against discussing the event in detail. He felt it had shaped his existence in ways he had never anticipated. He once conveyed to a journalist that he saw something, affirming that he understood what he saw, and it was neither a man in a suit nor a helicopter or airplane. He lamented wishing he had not witnessed the event at all. Today, the moors remain unchanged. Windswept, enshrouded in mist, and seemingly eternal, hikers continue to traverse the same paths. Occasionally, someone pauses, glances skyward, and perceives something ineffable. Ilkley Moor holds no answers. Nonetheless, it preserves the memory of a frosty December morning when one man sought picturesque views and discovered something altogether different, an occurrence that has remained unexplained for over 3 decades. The RAF Bentwaters audio tape, recorded from December 26th to 28th in 1980, captures events in Suffolk, England. The static disrupts, and without a doubt, there is evidence of a peculiar flashing red light ahead. One voice conveys urgency and tension. A click follows, succeeded by another voice confirming that something is decidedly approaching. Now they witness what appears to be a beam descending to the earth. The timestamp on the cassette recorder indicates 2 a.m. The voices emanate from U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt and his security team. They find themselves deep within Rendlesham Forest, adjacent to RAF Bentwaters, a British base leased to the United States during the Cold War. This marks the second night of UFO sightings that have perplexed personnel and contested official accounts for more than 40 years. What differentiates this case is that the entire event was documented in real time. What transpired over those 3 nights in December 1980 would solidify its place as one of the most meticulously detailed UFO occurrences in history. Not due to radar, blurry visuals, or second-hand recounts, but because the base's second-in-command held a tape recorder capturing every moment. This was not a farmer or civilian detailing strange lights. This was the deputy base commander of a coalition NATO airbase entrusted with nuclear armaments, elucidating an encounter with something unfamiliar, unexplainable, and evidently technologically advanced. It initiated on the evening of December 26th, when Airman First Class John Burroughs and Sergeant Bud Steffens observed lights descending into the woods beyond the perimeter fence. Assuming a potential aircraft had crashed, they alerted control. Following authorization to investigate, they were accompanied by Airman Jim Peniston. What they discovered eluded comprehension. They depicted a triangular craft featuring luminous panels, approximately 9 feet wide and 6 feet high. It hovered silently just above the forest floor. Peniston approached closely enough to make physical contact. He later asserted that he discerned enigmatic symbols adorning the hull, reminiscent of hieroglyphics. The craft then ascended vertically through the treetops, vanishing in the blink of an eye. The following day, Peniston began experiencing intense dreams, including sequences of binary code that he obsessively transcribed. He would eventually present these notes to researchers, igniting decades of debate. The base leadership, initially quick to dismiss the occurrence, found itself confronted with an unprecedented event on the second night. Colonel Charles Halt, once a skeptic, received reports of unusual lights reappearing in the woods. Eager to resolve the matter, he assembled a team of security personnel, brought along a handheld radiation meter, a starlight scope, and, most importantly, a cassette tape recorder to document the unfolding events. What he captured would ultimately be known as the Halt tape, an unsettling 18-minute recording that chronicled Halt and his team encountering a pulsating red glowing object in the depths of the woods. As they examined the landing site, they took radiation readings and discovered discernible depressions in the earth. The object, moving with eerie silence, glided among the trees before darting skyward and projecting beams of light downward, one of which illuminated their position directly. Observing the phenomena, Halt remarked on the beam descending to the ground, exclaiming that it was unreal. As the night wore on, multiple lights manifested in the sky, performing maneuvers that defied logic. Halt and his team pursued these luminous apparitions through the forest, capturing their real-time reactions on the tape. The urgency in their voices was juxtaposed with a calmness that hinted at the profound disturbance they felt. This audio, grainy and haunting, emerged as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence surrounding UFO encounters in history. With no embellishment or narrative flourish, it simply portrayed military professionals caught in a moment of direct, inexplicable contact. Initial interest from the British Ministry of Defence was lackluster at best. Their official position, reiterated for years, claimed that the incident posed no risk to national security. Yet, subsequent documents acquired via Freedom of Information requests unveiled a different story. The ministry was discreetly monitoring the episode, exchanging memos that referenced unidentified aerial phenomena observed over both RAF Bentwaters and nearby RAF Woodbridge. In contrast, the response from U.S. authorities was even more elusive. The incident report filed by HALT, known as the HALT Memo, remained classified and largely buried until it was eventually leaked, detailing a potential sighting of an unidentified craft, complete with ground impressions, heightened radiation levels, and visual confirmations from various personnel of the United States Air Force. To this day, neither the U.S. nor U.K. governments have provided an explanation, and the witnesses involved have steadfastly maintained their accounts, although their narratives eventually began to diverge. Peniston recounted that the craft had communicated with him via telepathy. Years later, Burroughs faced medical complications that led to a protracted legal battle with the Department of Veterans Affairs. His case gained traction following the eventual declassification that revealed RAF Bentwaters had stored tactical nuclear weapons at the time, a fact both governments had long denied. Interestingly, Burroughs received full medical disability coverage for injuries sustained during the Rendlesham event, with the court ruling recognizing that he had encountered an unidentified phenomenon during his service. This acknowledgement stands as a rare, if nuanced, recognition that something remarkable transpired in those woods. In 2010, Colonel Halt finally broke his silence after years of reticence. At a conference in Washington, D.C., he stated unequivocally that this was not a mere figment of the imagination. He had witnessed it. Many others had seen it as well. It was real. Furthermore, he noted that radar operators from RAF Watton had tracked a fast-moving object during the incident, but were instructed to maintain silence about it. The narrative gained renewed momentum in the 2000s, fueled by the curiosity of UFO researchers and journalists. In response, the British Ministry of Defence released additional documents, many heavily redacted, yet again asserted that no threat was detected. However, the evidence continued to mount. Analysis of the Halt tape confirmed its authenticity, aligning with the characteristics of 1980s cassette recordings. It was unedited, and the ambient sounds captured were consistent with the terrain of Rendlesham. Photographs of ground impressions at the scene revealed a tripod-like pattern, while the radiation readings taken by Halt's team indicated anomalies that exceeded standard background levels. Numerous airmen submitted sworn affidavits detailing what they witnessed. The most incriminating evidence, however, remains the silence. To this day, no plausible explanation for the events has been offered by either government. No missing aircraft, no scheduled experimental flight tests, and clear weather conditions. The radar blips were genuine. The audio is real. The witnesses are verifiable, yet the event remains unresolved. Unlike the Roswell incident, there were no materials recovered. The Phoenix sighting did not mirror the mass civilian observations. Yet, the uniqueness of the Rendlesham incident, particularly the Halt tape, lies in its immediacy. Listeners are transported to that moment. They feel the tension, confusion, and awe, all unfolding in real time. Colonel Halt has expressed a wish that the events had never occurred, but acknowledging their reality, he insists the evidence is substantial. Perhaps it is fitting that one of the most clearly documented and officially recognized UFO encounters in modern history did not unfold in secrecy, but was instead immortalized in sound, recorded on a simple tape deck wielded by a skeptical officer, committed to uncovering the truth. He did just that, and pressed record on a groundbreaking narrative that captures the Rendlesham Forest incident, which transpired from December 26th to 28th, 1980 in Suffolk, England. On Christmas night of 1980, 2 United States Air Force security personnel conducting perimeter patrols around RAF Woodbridge in Suffolk witnessed strange lights descending into Rendlesham Forest. What transpired over the ensuing 72 hours would evolve into the most documented and contested UFO incident in British history. An event characterized by multiple military witnesses, recorded radiation levels, physical evidence, and real-time audio captured during the encounter. Both RAF Woodbridge and the adjacent RAF Bentwaters were under the management of the United States Air Force, operating under a NATO agreement, housing advanced weaponry and espionage equipment amidst the heightened tensions of the Cold War. The bases were notable for housing the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing, rendering them some of the most securely monitored locations within the United Kingdom during that era. On that particular Christmas night, just after the clock struck 3 in the morning on December 26th, Airman First Class John Burroughs, along with Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston, received orders to investigate unsettling reports of peculiar lights shimmering in the dense forest just beyond the eastern perimeter. They anticipated possibly discovering a downed aircraft. Instead, what they stumbled upon was an object of structured design casting a bluish-white glow, hovering silently amongst the towering trees. Peniston, who later provided a detailed witness statement and underwent hypnosis to extract further memories of the encounter, indicated that he approached the object at close range. He characterized it as metallic, approximately triangular in shape, measuring 10 feet in length and 8 feet in height, inscribed with unusual symbols reminiscent of ancient hieroglyphics. The atmosphere felt electrically charged at that moment, and according to both men, time appeared to lose its conventional flow. Watches malfunctioned while radios emitted a relentless static. Peniston claimed to have touched the object and meticulously recorded his observations in a logbook, which included sketches of the symbols he encountered. Then, without forewarning, the craft descended swiftly and vanished through the forest canopy. Later that same morning, the base's security team returned to the location. They uncovered 3 small indentations in a triangular formation on the ground, precisely matching the presumed layout of the object's landing gear. Above them, tree branches were either broken or singed, suggesting something out of the ordinary had transpired. Geiger counters deployed by the base's disaster preparedness team registered heightened radiation levels at the site, peaking directly above the indentations and on a tree trunk where the craft was purported to have made contact. Yet the incident did not cease there. In the early hours of December 28th, Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt spearheaded a second investigation team into the forest after personnel reported unusual lights once again. Armed with a handheld tape recorder, Halt's 18-minute audio recording during this follow-up would emerge as a pivotal element of the case. It captured real-time accounts of lights navigating through the trees, beams illuminating the ground, and segments splitting into multiple objects. Halt's voice, initially calm, progressively conveyed an escalating tension as he narrated the sights unfolding before him. There was no doubt about it. This was peculiar. It was coming closer. They witnessed what seemed to be a beam descends to the forest floor. The objects, as recorded and later testified, appeared to exhibit intelligent movement, skillfully dodging trees, hovering in synchronicity, and even directing beams of light into the weapons storage area of the Bentwaters base. Halt's official memo, ultimately released under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act, categorized the encounter as involving unidentified flying objects. This document circulated widely within both the British Ministry of Defense and U.S. Air Force channels. Through the years, numerous eyewitnesses who experienced that night have come forward to validate the events. Master Sergeant Monroe Neville, tasked with carrying the Geiger counter during the inquiry, corroborated the elevated radiation readings. Sergeant Adrian Bestenza, who was also present during Halt's return to the forest, later affirmed claims that the objects in the sky seemed to respond to the soldiers' presence. The Rendlesham Forest incident garnered heightened credibility due to its chain of command and the substantial documentation surrounding it. Colonel Halt held the position of second in command at a significant NATO air base. His memo, tape recording, and subsequent statements were not mere anonymous claims. They represented documented accounts from individuals who risked their careers to share what they witnessed. The British Ministry of Defense did seek statements from U.S. officials, but later concluded that the events posed no strategic importance, a decision many interpreted as a deliberate maneuver to sidestep potential international friction during the Cold War. Skeptics have proposed several alternative explanations, including misidentified beams from the nearby Orford Ness Lighthouse, stars distorted by atmospheric conditions, or even practical jokes perpetrated by fellow airmen. However, these theories provide no rational explanation for the physical trace evidence, the radar-confirmed motion of lights, the radiation readings, or the multitude of trained military witnesses spanning multiple nights. The Orford Ness narrative, in particular, has been fervently disputed by numerous witnesses who had served at the base for extended periods and were well acquainted with the lighthouse's rotational pattern and visibility. Among the more contentious claims regarding the incident is that Peniston experienced a binary code transmission when he made contact with the object. In the 1990s, under hypnosis and during interviews, Peniston unveiled that following the encounter, he began transcribing a sequence of ones and zeros that flooded his consciousness. This code, when later analyzed, was deciphered as a series of coordinates targeting ancient sites across the globe, including the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Nazca Lines, and the Temple of Apollo. Critics have questioned the authenticity of these claims, noting the significant time lapse between the incident and the eventual revelation of the binary code. However, Peniston asserts that he kept the notes confidential for many years out of security concerns. By 2010, fresh witnesses emerged. Colonel Conrad, who served as the commanding officer at the base during the incident, confirmed in an interview that something incredibly strange occurred, stating that his men distinctly observed a phenomenon that unsettled them greatly. While he remained cautious about designating the event a UFO encounter, he did not contest the fundamental truths expressed in the patrol reports or HALT's documentation. The Ministry of Defense officially ceased its inquiry into UFOs in 2009, but by that time, the Rendlesham case had become a seminal narrative within modern ufology, standing as the most thoroughly documented military UFO encounter in this time. United Kingdom. Sometimes dubbed as Britain's Roswell, the Rendlesham case diverges significantly from its American counterpart. Unlike Roswell, this incident unfolded under the scrutiny of active duty officers who documented their observations in real time, escaping the suffocating cloak of decades-long secrecy or the immediate blanket of disavowals. In the years following the event, Rendlesham Forest transformed into a hallowed ground for researchers, journalists, and curious tourists eager to engage with its legacy. A designated walking trail now traces the steps leading to the purported landing site, while local councils have erected plaques to commemorate the extraordinary occurrences. The forest itself has remained largely untouched, exuding a tranquil rural charm characterized by its towering pines. Yet visitors, particularly those familiar with the history, often report an unsettling stillness lingering in the areas where impressions in the earth were once discovered. Numerous books, documentaries, and formal reports have scrutinized the Rendlesham incident, yet none have succeeded in decisively discrediting its fundamental truths. The undeniable fact remains that a cadre of United States Air Force personnel observed structured crafts in the sky and on the ground over the course of several nights, measuring inexplicably high levels of radiation, all while capturing evidence through both audio recordings and physical data. The official reaction to these revelations was one of muted dismissal, lacking depth or completeness, further shrouding the incident in an aura of mystery. Despite persistent inquiries, no photographs of the unidentified objects have surfaced, although various witnesses claim they witnessed Air Force members documenting the site with cameras. Speculation persists that these images were either confiscated or classified. Similarly, radar and satellite data from the Bentwaters Control Tower remain either sealed away or have been irrevocably lost. Freedom of Information Act requests have yielded scant results, failing to produce comprehensive logs of the remarkable nights. Consequently, the Rendlesham Forest incident continues to exist in a state of unresolved ambiguity, occupying a unique position within the annals of UFO history. Not merely a fleeting light in the sky or a second-hand account, this was a meticulously documented, multi-witness event involving military personnel stationed at a base equipped with nuclear capabilities. Despite the decades of questioning and the probing scrutiny it has endured, no entirely plausible natural or human-made explanation has reconciled the myriad facts surrounding it. Those who participated in the encounter still share their experiences. Some disclose their accounts willingly, while others disclose them with trepidation, yet none have ever suggested it was merely a matter of misinterpretation. For numerous witnesses, the Rendlesham incident did more than stretch the boundaries of their imagination. It fundamentally challenged their perceptions of reality. Whatever transpired in those foreboding woods left indelible marks, not only on the soil, but also on the instruments used and in the consciousness of those who entered the forest, expecting nothing beyond yet another cold, silent night. In the late summer of 1975, in Shropshire, on the edge of Lello, England, the morning unfolded peacefully across the low fields. A fine haze clung to the hedgerows, and David Henshaw, a 46-year-old livestock farmer, began his usual rounds through the paddocks, his prior day's boot tracks still faintly visible upon the damp grass. His routine exhibited little variation, checking fences, counting livestock, and surveying the perimeter for signs of intrusion or damage. The time of year was notably serene, absent the clamor of lambing or the bustling presence of visitors, save for the occasional delivery truck trailing down the lane. It was at the furthest corner of a grazing field that he first stumbled upon something out of the ordinary. At first glance, he assumed it might be a small van or a piece of farm machinery abandoned by a neighbor. However, the object's shape diverged from any familiar form. It was too compact and rounded, oddly suspended above the ground upon three slender supports. The early morning light glinted off its smooth surface, revealing no bolts, panels, or painted indicators characteristic of conventional farm equipment. Curiosity piqued, Henshaw navigated over the stile and began approaching the object. His boots made soft impressions in the saturated earth, the dew lingering fresh upon the pasture. As he neared, the appearance of the object grew increasingly peculiar. A low dome crowned its oval body, measuring no more than 4 meters across, its metallic surface dull yet striking in its otherness. The supports, securely embedded in the soil, left no trace of tire marks or tracks leading to the location. Puzzling over its enigmatic presence, Henshaw's attention was drawn to movement alongside the craft. Two figures revealed themselves, each no taller than his chest, clad from head to toe in snug-fitting silvery gray suits that clung to their forms without a single wrinkle. Their heads appeared disproportionately large relative to their bodies, with a pale, smooth complexion that made it difficult to ascertain whether they were adorned with helmets or if that was simply their skin. Suddenly, one of the figures turned sharply toward him. In that instant, Henshaw felt a peculiar paralysis envelop him. His legs locked in place, arms hung at his sides, and even his breathing slowed to a frail whisper. It was more than mere faintness. It felt as if all his muscles had been switched off while his awareness remained intact. The two figures exchanged what Henshaw interpreted as a glance of communication before stepping closer to the craft. A faint hum emerged, intertwining with a subtle vibration coursing through the ground. The craft ascended vertically, its three supports folding away beneath it, and astonishingly, there was no stirring of air, nary a displacement of dust or grass as it lifted steadily. Once free of the hedgerow, it banked sharply, darting away and disappearing in mere seconds. The hum dissipated, leaving the field in profound silence. Just as swiftly as the sensation had engulfed him, the immobilization lifted, granting Henshaw his movement back. He staggered slightly and took deep breaths to regain his composure, making his way toward the site where the object had previously rested. He expected to find evidence of charred earth or disturbed soil, yet instead he encountered 3 sharply etched impressions in the grass, forming a perfect triangle. Each patch was roughly the size of a dinner plate, the grass flattened and warm beneath his fingertips, while the soil below felt compacted and solid. The outlines of the impressions were defined, exhibiting no damage to the surrounding blades of grass. A curious absence occurred. There were no footprints etched around the marks, not even his own, portraying an untouched environment in the rest of the pasture. Back at the farmhouse, he contacted the local police station. Within the hour, 2 constables in uniform arrived, meticulously examining the site and questioning him with care. They documented the triangular formation, noting the uniform size and depth of the impressions alongside the conspicuous absence of any surrounding disturbances. Henshaw observed as one constable pressed his boot into the nearby soil for comparison. The grass there rebounded, and the earth yielded easily, a stark contrast to the compacted patches they were investigating. Photographs were taken from ground level, each captured with a scale marker positioned next to the impressions. While the constables were unable to ascertain a cause, one quietly suggested that the marks did not resemble those typically left by helicopters, which were sometimes observed during RAF training exercises. That afternoon, a man dressed in plain clothes arrived at the farm in a dark saloon car. He introduced himself only as a representative of the Air Ministry and requested to see the site. His demeanor was calm, almost detached, yet Henshaw took note of his meticulous nature as he measured the distances between each impression, sketching the triangular arrangement with a practiced precision. He collected small samples of soil, placing them into labeled envelopes, and dedicated several minutes to photographing the entire field from various angles. Though he made no comments regarding the origins of the marks, he did inquire whether Henshaw had heard any sounds of aircraft either before or after the sighting. When Henshaw replied that he had only noticed a faint hum emanating from the object itself, the man simply nodded and made a final note before departing. In the days that followed, the flattened grass began to lift, yet the soil at each impression remained stubbornly hard, even after light rain fell. Puddles formed differently over them, with water beating rather than soaking in. Several of Henshaw's neighbors came to witness the sight, each expressing their amazement at how sharply the marks ended and how clean the surrounding grass remained. No formal updates came from the police or the Air Ministry, but through a parish council contact, Henshaw discovered that the case had been catalogued as an unidentified aerial object with physical trace. Soon after, a regional UFO research group visited, conducting an extensive interview with him while taking their own soil samples. Their subsequent report indicated minor chemical alterations in the compacted soil when compared to control samples, although they emphasized that these changes were not harmful. The incident failed to garner national media attention, only being briefly mentioned in the Shropshire Star. Henshaw found solace in this, having no desire to invite mockery. When he did find the opportunity to share his account, it remained unchanged. The craft had been silent save for the hum, its maneuvers precise, and the two figures had appeared purposeful but not threatening. Over the years, researchers drew parallels to other British close encounters of the second kind from the 1970s. Small crafts, humanoid occupants, triangular landing marks, and a subtle yet persistent interest from official channels. With the Ministry of Defense's UFO desk still operational in Whitehall during that time, many such cases were examined discreetly and subsequently filed away without public clarification. By the following spring, the evidence in the field had all but disappeared. The grass had regrown, the soil had softened, and livestock roamed freely across the area. The impressions lived on only in photographs and archived notes. For Henshaw, however, the experience retained its vividness. He could vividly recall the exact angle of the craft as it ascended, the precise layout of its landing supports, and the surreal, weightless sensation that had enveloped him. There had been no dialogue, no warnings, only the abrupt emergence of something entirely alien, followed by its equally abrupt departure. Within the broader narrative of rural British UFO sightings, his case stood as just one of many understated occurrences that suggested a consistent pattern. An ordinary witness, tangible physical evidence, a discreet official investigation, and an absence of definitive answers. The morning had faded into memory, yet the lingering questions remained, as firmly fixed in his mind as the impressions had once been in the Shropshire grass. The Tenerife near collision in March 1979 unfolded in the Canary Islands, Spain. The crew reported a near collision with an unidentified object. Brilliant lights had passed directly ahead of them, with no contact on radar. The captain's voice came through the radio, sharp and urgent. In the cockpit of a commercial jet descending toward Tenerife's Los Rodeo airport, the crew had just evaded what could have led to disaster. Passengers experienced a sudden jolt as the aircraft banked, the twinkling lights of the Canary Islands coastline tilting outside their windows. Ahead, an object, splendidly illuminated, structured, and enormous, had silently crossed their flight path, disappearing into the night. This was not merely a vague light on the horizon. It constituted a near collision, a serious event documented in aviation reports, scrutinized by Spanish authorities, and noted quietly by the military. What came to be recognized as the Tenerife near collision has since become one of Spain's most compelling and unsettling UFO cases. The aircraft had departed from mainland Spain late that evening, destined for Tenerife, a routine flight that had been navigated countless times before. Both pilots were seasoned veterans with thousands of hours logged. The route was well-trodden and the checklist routine. Nothing indicated that the night would take an extraordinary turn. Conditions were ideal for night flying, with a clear March sky and excellent visibility. Passengers drifted into slumber in their seats, lulled by the consistent hum of the engines. A few read quietly under the cabin lights or gazed at the stars outside. Meanwhile, the captain and first officer commenced their preparations to descend as the faint glow of the Canary Islands emerged on the horizon. At around 12:30 in the morning, as they descended through 12,000 feet, the first officer spotted an unusual light. Initially, he dismissed it as another aircraft approaching from the busy flight paths into Tenerife. However, he continued to observe, sensing that something was not quite right. The luminosity was too intense, too constant, lacking the characteristic flicker of navigation beacons. The captain leaned forward in his seat, instinctively aware of the same unsettling feeling. With an urgent determination, he keyed the microphone to inquire about existing traffic at their altitude, heading directly toward them. The response from Tenerife Control was swift, flat, and unequivocal. There was no traffic in their sector. Before the crew could further process the information, the object rapidly closed the distance between them. Later, both pilots would recount the encounter with startling clarity. The object was enormous, dwarfing any aircraft they had encountered previously. It emitted a dazzling light while revealing a structure beneath the brilliance, its sharp contours refracting against the glow in a way that was unmistakable. It was not a flare or a meteor, nor some figment of imagination. This presence was tangible and solid. Reacting instinctively, the captain maneuvered the jet into a climbing turn. Passengers jolted awake, clutching their seats as the cabin lights danced across the windows now at odd angles. For a fleeting moment, both pilots braced themselves for a catastrophic impact. The object barreled across their flight path, so close it enveloped their field of vision before vanishing into the night with astonishing speed. The entire event transpired in less than a minute, yet to the crew and passengers, it felt like an eternity. A rush of adrenaline coursed through them. The cockpit fell into silence as both men struggled to process the extraordinary occurrence. Although the majority of passengers remained asleep, a few had glimpsed the object through their windows. One later described it as a massive luminous shape, far too close for comfort. Another reported that it seemed to be a light with substance behind it, brighter and sharper than anything known in the night sky. Their accounts, although brief, aligned perfectly with the observations from the cockpit. A brilliant, structured object crossed perilously close, igniting a fear of collision. Back in Los Rodeos' control tower, the captain's voice crackled with urgency, electrifying the room. Controllers urgently scanned their radar screens. Nothing. The airspace above Tenerife appeared clear. The radar displayed no anomalies. Technicians quickly re-verified frequencies, equipment, and records. No trace appeared. Yet, the concurrent testimony of two reputable pilots could not simply be dismissed. Notes were meticulously recorded. The time was annotated. Every detail of the radio exchange was safeguarded. The void in the radar data was troubling. Such a phenomenon should have been flagged by the very safeguards meant to prevent it. Two aircraft ostensibly sharing the same airspace without detection. For the controllers, the realization that something had crossed the jet's path, leaving no mark on their screens, was as disconcerting as the near miss itself. The aircraft landed safely at Los Rodeos. Within the cockpit, the captain and first officer drafted their reports with the precision expected of professionals. Their language was notably measured, employing terms like unidentified aerial object, brilliantly illuminated, and crossed flight path without radar confirmation. They refrained from speculation, yet the gravity of their choice of words was evident. Civil aviation protocols necessitated logging the incident as a near collision. Statements from passengers were collected, and the tower's log received additional documentation. By the following morning, the file had already begun to expand. Spanish civil aviation authorities embarked on a review. The dossier soon included the cockpit accounts from both the captain and first officer, statements from passengers who had been awake during the encounter, tower logs timestamping the radio exchanges, and radar checks indicating no contact. The Spanish Air Force hastily became involved. Los Rodeos operated under a joint civil-military oversight framework, meaning any unidentified phenomena in the skies over the Canary Islands posed a potential strategic concern. Officers interviewed the crew, scrutinized the logs, and requested radar footage from stations dispersed across the islands. None found discrepancies. Privately, the matter was shared with NATO contacts, raising a singular blunt question. Had any Allied radar detected something unusual over the Atlantic that night? No public response was forthcoming. For international aviation, the Tenerife incident presented a delicate conundrum. The International Civil Aviation Organization maintained protocols for near misses, yet there were none for objects characterized as structured, massive, and brilliantly lit, while remaining undetectable by radar. Choosing silence seemed to be the safest course. The file was concluded with a concise notation: unidentified aerial object. There would be no explanations, no alternative theories, and no publicity surrounding the incident. Skeptics later suggested explanations. Some pointed to Venus, which indeed shines brilliantly in the evening sky. However, Venus does not disrupt a jet's flight path at such proximity, nor does it compel seasoned pilots to execute severe evasive maneuvers. Others proposed meteors. Meteors streak downward with visible trails, vanishing in seconds. This object, however, propelled horizontally, retained its form, and moved with unmistakable control. Speculations arose about clandestine military aircraft, but in 1979, no known craft could match the profile: large, glowing, radar invisible, and capable of immediate acceleration. The Canary Islands were far removed from any recognized testing range. Every potential explanation crumbled beneath scrutiny. What remained was the most straightforward truth. The pilots witnessed precisely what they reported: a structured, luminous entity of unknown origin. The Tenerife case was not an anomaly. In December of 1978, a crew from Aerolíneas Argentinas had recounted a similarly radiant structured object pacing their aircraft over South America. In 1986, Japan Airlines Flight 1628 encountered another massive UFO tracked on both radar and by multiple crew members over Alaska. The pattern was becoming evident. Commercial aviators worldwide were experiencing unidentified aerial phenomena often close enough to trigger evasive responses. Tenerife was woven into this unfolding narrative, a near catastrophe that defied explanation yet could not be overlooked. For the pilots, Tenerife represented more than just an unsettling professional incident. It was a juncture where their extensive training, reliance on instruments, and accumulated experience faced an encounter devoid of any rational explanation. They executed all protocols with precision, observed the anomaly, reacted promptly, and filed meticulous reports. Yet, the void of answers lingered ominously. For the passengers, it was a near miss with disaster, an indelible memory etched into their consciousness. The abrupt turn, the searing light, the dread of collision, the experiences etched themselves into their minds long after their safe landing. For air traffic controllers, it was a stark reminder of the inadequacies of their tools. Though radar revealed nothing, an imposing presence had undeniably occupied that airspace. To the Spanish Air Force, it manifested as yet another report handed forward, consigned to a classified archive, never to be deciphered or explained. On a pristine March evening in 1979, an airline soaring over the Atlantic on its approach to Tenerife found itself just seconds from calamity. An iridescent, structured object, larger than any known aircraft, unexpectedly intersected its flight path. Radar failed to detect it. No entity stepped forward to clarify its nature. The pilots dutifully documented their observations. The passengers vividly recalled their terror. The Air Force dutifully took notes, and then, once again, silence prevailed. The near miss at Tenerife remains one of aviation's spookiest UFO encounters, a stark reminder that even within controlled airspace, vast mysteries can challenge the very systems designed to safeguard human life. Consider the Aix-en-Provence case from January 8, 1981. This stands as France's most extensively documented UFO incident, which began not within a busy city or a scientific lab, but in a tranquil farmer's field on an unremarkable January afternoon. Renato Nicolai, a farmer in his 50s, was industriously engaged in work on his property just outside the quaint village of Aix-en-Provence, situated in southern France. The day was crisp and bright, the ideal winter afternoon allowing sounds to carry across the gentle hills. As Nicolai diligently repaired a stone terrace wall, an unusual noise disrupted the calm. It was neither the thunderous roar of an aircraft nor the mechanical buzzing of farm machinery. It emerged faintly, almost ethereal, akin to compressed air escaping or the high-frequency whine of an electrical transformer, a sound peculiar enough to cause him to halt mid-step, stone in hand, and glance skyward. Above the treetops that bordered his fields, something metallic traversed the sky. Its shape was oval, color gray, moving with a deliberate, steady grace. Immediately, Nicolai dismissed the possibility of it being an airplane. There was no deafening noise, no visible contrail marking its passage, nor any signs of a helicopter, as it displayed neither rotors nor the gust of air associated with blades. The craft descended effortlessly, gliding past the tree line until it hovered directly above his land. Nicolai's heart raced. In broad daylight, merely 50 meters from where he stood, the object gently landed, descending onto the soil with mechanical precision. From his vantage point, he could discern its dull gray exterior, a thickened rim encircling its base, and a conspicuous absence of any identifiable features. No windows, no symbols, no exhaust, just a compact metallic entity, resting silently on the ground. The encounter lasted fewer than 60 seconds. Then, accompanied by that same faint hissing sound, it elevated again. Dust swirled upward, and the grass bent under the force of its ascent. The object soared above the trees, jetted forward, and disappeared from view. For a fleeting moment, Nicolai stood rooted in silence. The afternoon returned to its hushed state, cicadas buzzing softly in the distance. Yet, upon surveying the field, he recognized that what he had witnessed was not a mere figment of imagination. The grass where the ship had landed exhibited darkened patches. The soil displayed compressed impressions forming a perfect circle. Something substantial, warm, and very real had made contact there. Nicolai was a man grounded in practicality, more concerned with his farm than tales of the unexplained. However, the tangible evidence compelled him to act. Later that day, he drove into town and approached the local gendarmerie. Calmly and without embellishment, he recounted his experience. He signed a statement documenting the presence of a metallic object, approximately 2 meters in diameter, gray and oval, which landed on his field for less than a minute before departing. He refrained from theorizing about its origins or describing lights, beings, or cryptic messages. He solely recounted what his eyes had observed and what his ears had heard. To their credit, the gendarmes listened intently. By the early 1980s, France had already initiated a framework for cataloging reports of unusual aerial phenomena. Reports were systematically gathered, documented, and, when warranted, escalated to higher authorities. Nicolai's account would soon gain traction far beyond what he anticipated. Within days, officials arrived at his farm. They recorded photographs of the site, re-interviewed Nicolai, and ensured his testimony aligned with his written statement. His narrative proved consistent, and his demeanor impressed them, a serious individual uninterested in publicity. The case was escalated to Gapin, a group created in 1977 within CNIS, the French space agency. GEPAN was unique on a global scale. While many countries dismissed UFO reports as trivial curiosities, France established a formal government-supported unit comprising scientists dedicated explicitly to studying such phenomena. Upon their arrival in Aix-en-Provence, GEPAN investigators approached Nicolai's field as though it were a crime scene. They meticulously extracted soil samples from the circular impressions and sealed them for further analysis. Grass and other plants were clipped, labeled, and transported for examination. Photographs documented every angle of the situational context. Measurements were meticulous, including the diameter of the circle, its depth, and its distance from Nicolai's terrace wall. Nicolai himself underwent multiple rounds of questioning. Each retelling was consistent, and investigators concluded that he was a credible witness, reluctant to embellish. Back in the laboratory, the samples unveiled a remarkable narrative. The soil exhibited unusual compression in its upper layers, indicative of a sudden application of weight. The clay composition had transformed on a microscopic level, as if it had briefly endured intense heat. The flora provided further clues. Grass and weeds confined within the circle exhibited diminished chlorophyll levels and exhibited cell damage. To biologists examining this phenomenon, it appeared that the plants had been subjected to surges of electromagnetic radiation. In stark contrast, control samples taken from the surrounding area displayed no comparable alterations. GAN, employing carefully measured scientific terminology, concluded that the location bore physical evidence suggestive of an encounter with an unidentified aerospace vehicle. Word of the findings spread rapidly throughout the village, drawing neighbors to Nicolai's farm to witness the marks firsthand. Some approached with a sense of curiosity, while others regarded it as compelling evidence. For Nicolai, however, the situation was more about upheaval than notoriety. He harbored no wish for the spotlight. Nonetheless, his property had inadvertently become the focal point of an extensively examined UFO incident that would be remembered for years to come. The circular imprints gradually faded over the course of a few days, quickly overrun by fresh grass, yet the scientific documentation remained enduring. By the mid-1980s, the Aix-en-Provence case had infiltrated academic discourse internationally. UFO researchers from various corners of the globe frequently cited it as a definitive point of reference. Distinct from many cases that depended exclusively on witness recollection or photographic evidence, this particular incident was fortified by tangible data. Soil chemistry, plant biology, exact measurements, and official accounts combined to create a robust scientific foundation. This was not merely an eyewitness testimony, it was a thorough scientific archive. While the French media offered only limited coverage, attention abroad significantly heightened. Researchers in the United States and the United Kingdom lauded it as the benchmark for UFO trace cases. Conferences held in Europe repeatedly referenced GEPAN's meticulous work, shedding light on the rarity of governmental bodies releasing such findings. Skeptics sought alternative explanations. Some posited that agricultural equipment might have created the impressions, yet no tire tracks corresponded with the unique compression patterns, and Nicolai firmly stated that such machinery had not been present. Others speculated about a helicopter's involvement, but helicopters typically leave a trail of noise, rotor wash, and often chemical traces, none of which were unearthed at the site. A handful accused Nicolai of concocting the story, yet the existence of biochemical anomalies in the plants, recorded under strictly controlled laboratory conditions, raised compelling questions. Every conventional hypothesis faltered under scrutiny. What lingered was irrefutable. An object, something massively physical and vibrantly energetic, had briefly made its landing in that field. The Aix-en-Provence event was not an isolated incident. Across the globe, researchers compiled similar cases where UFOs departed, leaving physical evidence behind. In 1964, in Socorro, New Mexico, police officer Lonnie Zamora reported witnessing an oval craft descend near the roadway. The site contained burned soil and charred vegetation. In 1971, in Dallas, Kansas, A farmer and his family observed a luminous object that left behind a peculiar ring-shaped patch of dehydrated earth, subsequently examined for its unusual characteristics. In Norway's Hestalen Valley, beginning in the early 1980s, recurring glowing orbs were extensively documented and analyzed with scientific instrumentation, yielding empirical data quite akin to that which was obtained in France. Despite the geographic distance, these cases mirrored one another. Silently operating craft, circular impressions, scorched or altered soil, and damaged vegetation, the same patterns repeated across the globe. What distinguished France was Ghane's scrupulous approach. While many nations disregarded such reports, France deployed scientists on site, collected comprehensive evidence, and published findings that, while cautious, were nonetheless serious. The Tranzone-Provence incident evolved into one of the most well-documented UFO encounters within global archives. The craft arrived quietly, departed quietly, yet the Earth it contacted continues to hold memories of that fleeting encounter. Perhaps that is the reason the Tranzone-Provence case remains vital, not due to mere rumor or speculation, but for the profound silence that ensued. The silence of a farmer returning to his labor, of neighbors sharing whispers but refusing to forget, and of scientists humbly acknowledging that they had measured phenomena that should not have existed. What persists is elemental, a circular expanse of soil, beleaguered plants, and the recollection of a subtle hiss against the cold expanse of winter skies. Occasionally, the unknown does not merely soar above. It descends, marks its territory, and retreats without a trace, yet its presence resonates long after.